The ocean is deep, but more than that, it's hidden. A place where darkness does not begin at midnight, but a few meters beneath the surface. A world not illuminated by the sun, but by pressure, instinct, and the strange cold hunger of time. And tonight, we're going to descend into that world slowly, gently, and talk about the things that live where light refuses to arrive. Creatures that are not born from imagination, but from the most secret branches of evolution. Animals that have adapted to places without heat, horizon, and mercy. Not all of them are big. Not all are monsters, but all belong to a kingdom as real as the sea itself. And many have never been seen alive, only dragged up by nets, half dissolved by their own biology. Eyes too big for the surface, teeth designed not to trap, but to hold, as if they feared the depths would steal their prey. So take a deep breath, exhale slowly, and remember that if this calms you, you can always come back, subscribe, and we'll be here. Our descent begins in the pitch-black waters of the bathypelagic zone, about 3,000 m below the surface. Here we find the black dragonfish, a creature taken directly from a nightmare, if nightmares had patience. The dragonfish is only about 15 centimeters long, but don't be deceived. Its mouth is full of needle-shaped fangs so large that it cannot even fully close its jaw. Its skin is coated with pigments that absorb almost all the light it receives, making it virtually invisible even to other predators. And yet, despite this camouflage, the dragonfish shines, not visibly, but in infrared. It produces a kind of private illumination that only it can see, illuminating the darkness without ever revealing itself. Imagine hunting in absolute darkness with a flashlight that only your own eyes can detect. That is what this fish does, and it is not the only one. Lurking not far away, we find the gulper fish, also known as the pelican eel. It has a body like a ribbon and a mouth like a bag, capable of opening wider than its body. The gulper doesn't bite. It swallows everything. Entire schools of fish can disappear into its mouth in an instant. Its stomach expands like a balloon to accommodate everything it manages to catch. No pursuit, no struggle, just an explosion of movement followed by stillness as it digests darkness. And as it floats back into the void, its tail glows faintly, a soft blue light intended to attract the next mistake. But not all creatures of these depths are hunters. Some are observers. The barrel-eye fish is one of the strangest animals ever discovered. Its head is transparent. Yes, you heard that right. Its head. Two bright green balls peek inside a transparent dome like twin periscopes looking up. This fish floats motionless under its prey, watching through the roof of its own skull. And when it is ready, it tilts its eyes forward, lunges upward, and captures its food. Scientists have called it an evolutionary dead end. But perhaps it is just because we're not used to seeing something so literal in its design. A creature whose brain is visible, observing, recording, remembering in silence. Now let's delve beyond the abyssal plain, beyond the bones of old whales and the corpses of ships that never saw land again. At about 6,000 m, we enter the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the underworld of the sea. Here, the weight of the ocean above us is almost unimaginable. The pressure is so great that it could crush a human submarine like a soda can. And yet, life endures. One of these creatures is the faceless cusk eel. When it was first pulled from the depths, scientists were baffled. It had no eyes, no visible mouth, no gills, just gelatinous, pale skin and a strange, motionless body. But upon examining it closely, they discovered that its face was not missing. It was simply hidden away. The creature's mouth is located at the bottom of its head, protected so it cannot be detected. Its eyes are buried under skin and perceive only the slightest glimmer of light. It does not need to express anything. It does not need recognition. It is the sea's best answer to one riddle. How does a predator not want to be seen? Another ghost of this kingdom is the giant amphipod. Most amphipods are tiny, even harmless ones. But in the deep trenches they grow enormously, some as big as a human hand. They drift in groups, like swarms of crustaceans, feeding on any organic material that falls from above. A rain of decomposition. Their exoskeletons are translucent, almost glassy, as if the trench had not finished forming them. And maybe that is so. Down here, time works in a different way. Pressure suspends metabolism. Evolution slows down. Nothing hurries. Even death seems to take its time. But there are worse things. There is the deep sterea jellyfish, a strange undulating sheet of translucent flesh that floats like a haunted sheet. It has no tentacles or eyes, just a wide, undulating membrane that contracts and expands in ghostly waves. When it envelopes prey, it does not sting. It folds, enveloping the victim in its body and slowly digesting it on all sides. There is no struggle, no escape, just a floating coffin in darkness. And perhaps most disturbing is the Magnapinna squid, a creature rarely seen. Only a few confirmed sightings exist, each more disturbing than the last. With arms and tentacles that can stretch up to 10 times the length of its body, and elbow-shaped joints that bend at impossible angles, the Magnapinna moves like a puppet with invisible strings. It does not lunge, move quickly, or spin. It floats, with its arms hanging down like threads from an invisible master, watching, waiting, drifting in absolute stillness, as if the ocean itself had sewn a puppet for purposes it has not yet explained. These creatures are not myths. They're not stories. They exist now, living lives that we will never fully understand, under pressures that we will never feel. They're not evil. They are not monstrous, but they are alien. Not because of their origin, but because of what they reveal. That the Earth still has corners untouched by time, where evolution moves like a whisper and survival is not written in strength, but in strangeness. We have only just begun. Second part, those who wait without eyes and depths. In that place where sunlight never reaches and sound moves like memory through molasses, there are creatures that do not hunt using sight. They do not stalk, chase, or pounce. They wait, motionless as stones, silent as sediments, born in a world where the only certainty is darkness. And in that darkness, they have become patient architects of terror. One of these creatures is the sea spider, and although it shares a name with its terrestrial cousin, it is something completely different. It is found all over the world and becomes really strange in the abyss. Deep-sea spiders are skeletal and long-limbed, with bodies so small and limbs so thin that they look like the outline of an animal that never fully formed. They do not swim. They crawl slowly and with difficulty along the seabed, over sponges and anemones, inserting a long, needle-like proboscis into their prey and drinking them dry. They do not have lungs or a true circulatory system. Their blood moves only thanks to their legs. Their heartbeat is their movement. They're creatures so biologically different from us that it is still debated whether they really belong to the group to which we once believed they belonged. And yet there they are, walking across the bottom of the planet like forgotten warnings from an earlier era. Nearby, scattered along hydrothermal vents and methane veins, are colonies of yeti crabs, pale and hairy. These blind crustaceans cluster around seething fissures in the oceanic crust, waving their claws in the chemically rich water, not to feed, but to cultivate. Tufts of bacteria grow on their arms, which they cultivate and slowly consume over time. The crab cannot see, cannot hear, can only feel. The vibrations in the volcanic water, the rhythm of the pulses of the fumaroles, the tremors of distant movements. And through this, he knows how to live, how to eat, how to wait. He cultivates his own survival, little by little, like patience made flesh. But not everything down here is slow. The vampire squid is a master of disguise, speed, and silence. Despite its name, it does not drink blood. It does not chase its prey. It floats in the twilight zone of the intermediate waters, where detritus falls from above like organic snow. Its name comes from its deep crimson skin and the black membrane that stretches between its arms like a cape. When threatened, it turns around, flipping its arms over its head and revealing spiny protuberances that look like jaws. It does not produce ink. Instead, It releases a bright cloud of bioluminescent mucus that glows in the dark and disorients its predators. And then it disappears, fading into the depths like a thought you almost had, but couldn't hold on to. Further away, where the pressure intensifies and the ground rises, forming cold black ridges, lives the coelacanth, a prehistoric fish that was believed to have been extinct for 66 million years until a live specimen was captured in 1938. With fins that move like legs and a jaw that dislocates in a strange vertical direction, the coelacanth swims with a quiet dignity, as if the world above were none of its business. Its blood is cold, its movements are slow, its brain is small, but its life is long, and it reminds us that extinction is a story we tell when we stop looking. The depths do not forget as easily as we do. Now let's turn our gaze toward the giant isopod, a creature that looks like a pill bug enlarged to a nightmare size. Almost the size of a domestic cat, this scavenger is armored, relentless, and completely expressionless. It lives on the remains of whales, sharks, and any other creature that is unlucky enough to fall to the bottom. When they find food, giant isopods gorge themselves until they are immobile, sometimes not eating again for years. There is no rush, no urgency, only hunger and the will to endure its absence for as long as necessary. They lie buried under the silt, motionless, waiting for the smell of decomposition to reach their antennae. Their world is one of patience and banquets that only come after years of famine. Then there are the deep-sea siphonophores, perhaps the strangest of all. They are not a single animal, but a colony of individuals, all genetically identical, but specialized in different functions. Together, they form a long floating body that can extend more than 40 meters, longer than a blue whale. The front guides, the middle digests, and the back stings and captures a single organism composed of many. Their bodies glow with soft green and violet pulses, floating in the depths like threads of living code, suspended in a place where nothing else moves so gracefully. To see one is to see biology reimagined. Life not as something singular, but as a system, a ghost caravan in the water, and there is still more. The anglerfish, with its terrible smile and bioluminescent lure, does not only use its light to attract its prey. In some species, it uses it to attract its mates. The male, at birth, has no hope of surviving. He cannot hunt. He cannot grow. Its only objective is to find a female, adhere to her body, and merge with it. It merges with her skin, losing its eyes, fins, and independence. Over time, it is nothing more than a sack of testicles, part of her body, feeding on her blood for reproductive material. It is parasitism, courtship, and dependence all at once. A love story written with hunger and sacrifice. And beneath all this, beyond the reach of our deepest dives, there are creatures known only by fragments. Jaws without bodies, nameless bones. Once, a submersible passed through a current so cold and calm that all its cameras fogged. In the static, a broad, slow shape moved, with arms that did not wave but bent like a creature remembering how to be large. The crew dismissed it as an artifact, but some still remember the shape and weight, as if the ocean had briefly lifted something heavy to show and then buried it again. This world is not empty. It is full of things that we should never have seen or perhaps simply never asked to find in the right way. They are terrifying not because they wish us harm, but because they do not care if we understand them. They never expected us. They are not visitors. They are not guests. They are the original tenants on this planet. And in the stillness of the depths, they watch, feed, and listen. Always there in the darkness under light. Third part, where the bones sink and do not return. There is a region of the ocean far below the point where light fades and pressure prevails. A place that oceanographers call the abyssal pelagic zone. But among the few who study what lives there, it has another name, the plains of bonefall. This is where the bodies go. Not only the tiny planktonic deaths that rain daily like marine snow, but the large and rare falls. The final descent of whales, sharks, and perhaps, in another time, things even larger that are no longer seen. When a huge body dies and sinks into the abyss, it becomes a biome, a long, slow feast for the strangest creatures ever born on Earth. One of these creatures is the Odax worm, better known as the zombie worm. It has no eyes, mouth, or stomach. Instead, it consumes bones by chemical digestion, releasing acid to break down calcium and absorbing nutrients with root-like branching structures that delve deep into the marrow. A single dead whale can attract thousands of them. The Ododax adheres to the skeleton and flourishes, yes, flourishes, outward in soft feathery plumes, red and fluid, like a terrible underwater garden that blooms from death. Males never grow. They live inside the females, microscopic and forgotten. Its only function is fulfilled before being absorbed. The worms do not feed quickly. It takes years to clean a skeleton. Patient, tireless, and totally indifferent. But they're not the only ones who are attracted to bones. The hagfish is another scavenger. Long, eel-shaped, with a cartilage skull and a body built to squeeze into tight spaces. It slips inside the corpse of a fallen animal and begins to eat it from the inside. But it does not bite like other predators. It scrapes, using a tooth-like plate to crush the meat against the bone. And when disturbed, it releases a thick, suffocating slime that can suffocate anything that chases it. It can produce enough mucus in seconds to clog the gills of a shark. Evolution did not endow the hagfish with charm. It gave it rebelliousness. It is a creature that survives not with strength, but with the refusal to die. Sometimes something falls that is not an animal, perhaps a shipwreck, an airplane, a satellite capsule, or even a lost container full of discarded waste. Down here, everything that sinks becomes part of the seabed, and in exceptional cases, those things are swallowed by something stranger. In 2015, a deep-sea exploration team discovered a brine pool at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, nicknamed the Jacuzzi of Despair. It looked like a lake inside the ocean, shining and rippling within its own liquid walls. But this water was hypersaline and mixed with methane and hydrogen sulfide, lethal to most marine life. The fish that went into it did not swim out. Crabs and eels floated lifeless on its edges, stunned in the middle of their movement. But inside the pool, a handful of strange survivors lived. Tube worms, mussels, and microbial layers had adapted to the toxic conditions. They fed on chemicals, not sunlight or meat. Some of the equipment that touched the pool came back corroded, not because of the salt, but because of something more corrosive, more ancient. And under the surface of the brine, the sonar detected a solid shape. It was not a rock, nor a boat, just a shape. But nobody investigated further. The pool was left alone, marked, studied, but ultimately feared. There are places in the ocean where science ends. Not for lack of curiosity, but because something older demands it. The more one descends, the more the familiar rules break down. Let's take the tripod fish as an example. It rests on the seabed using 3 long, rigid fins as stilts, facing the current with its long pectoral fins extended, feeling the water like a blind man's hands. It does not hunt, it waits. When prey swims past, it simply opens its mouth. It does not even bother moving, and maybe it does not need to, because in the deepest currents, movement is a waste. Stillness means survival. The fish does not need to chase. Sooner or later, everything that lives above ends up sinking. Further down still, where even those patient predators begin to disappear, the ocean becomes a realm of anomalies. In the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench, unmanned probes recorded something unexpected. Regular rhythmic circular patterns in the sediment, almost 4 m wide and spaced with astonishing precision. At first it was thought that they were geological, but the patterns later showed signs of movement, faint traces connecting them, drag marks, clefts, as if something large and soft-bodied was curving against the seabed, slowly crawling in circular paths over the years. No known organism matched that behavior. There was no evidence of feeding, nesting, or defense. Only circles, silent, symmetrical, and expanding. Marine biologists remain divided. Some speculate about a new species of cephalopod. Others about a colony of deep-sea echinoderms. But there's a third theory that is whispered in the back rooms of academic conferences, that these patterns are not the work of an organism, that what we see is only the surface, like the top of a mushroom, while something much larger waits buried below, so vast and diffuse that we have mistaken it for geology. Imagine a being that stretches for kilometers, that does not move in minutes or hours, but in generations of slow rotation. A creature so old that it has survived languages so broad that it thinks in pressure, in mineral flow, in movements of the Earth's crust. And when it feels that your probe lands on it, that your submersible scrapes its skin, it does not react. Not yet. It remembers. And then there are the lights along multiple underwater mountain ranges. The cameras have captured inexplicable flashes, which are not bioluminescence from known fish or jellyfish. These are slow, sustained, geometric pulses, sometimes forming a triangle of light, and sometimes a ring. In one case, 3 independent submersibles recorded the same light pattern hundreds of kilometers away. The synchronization was exact, as if the ocean sent a signal. Scientists propose geological discharges, ignition of methane or fractures by stress that release chemical substances that cause the brightness. But no explanation takes into account the symmetry. None explain why the pulses stop when observation becomes direct. These lights do not behave like accidents. They behave like habits, like messages. In the end, part of what makes these creatures terrifying is not their danger or size, but the silence that surrounds them. We have explored the moon in more detail than our oceans. Every day, things pass below us that have never been named. They do not wait to be discovered. They do not want to be understood. They are older than thought, deeper than fear, and they continue evolving in the cold darkness beneath everything we know. We do not live on a planet with a single world. We live on one on top of another, and below, on yet another. Fourth part, the things that should not move but do. There's a type of stillness that exists only in the deepest places. It is not the peaceful tranquility of a forest, nor the muffled silence of snowfall, but a deeper, unnatural stillness. The type of stillness that feels immobilized, as if an enormous, incomprehensible pressure had nailed everything to the ground. In the deep trenches beyond the reach of the currents and life, as we know it, the seabed extends in strange folds and ridges, like scars left by something that we have never seen. Down here, things are not supposed to move. And yet they do. In 2016, a Japanese deep-sea expedition sent an autonomous vehicle to the Bonin Trench, a narrow fissure that went almost 10 kilometers into the Earth's crust. During the first 20 hours, the robot traveled through a lifeless landscape of silt, rocks, and occasional fragments of manganese crust. But as the robot approached a slope near a tectonic scarp, it captured images of something that still baffles researchers. A large, rounded object, initially mistaken for a rock, shifted slightly as the robot passed. It was not a fall or turn, but a tilt of only a few centimeters. Then it stabilized again. It had no appendages, face, or eyes. It was dark, with a texture similar to volcanic stone and completely smooth. But the movement was deliberate, controlled, and after the tracker passed, its cameras captured something else. The sediment under the object was unaltered. Whatever it was, it had not pushed itself. It had moved from within. Later analysis revealed that similar movements had been observed in the Puerto Rico Trench, the South Sandwich Trench, and even near the Java Trench. Always with the same shape, always with the same behavior, as if these stones were not debris, but sleeping things, waiting not for food or light, but for time. Now, imagine swimming next to that shape in total darkness. Imagine not knowing if it is alive or not until it adjusts slowly, enough so that you know that it has felt you pass and has decided not to move again. In other parts of the depths, we find the giant larvae. These creatures are surprisingly small, about the size of a human hand, but they build structures that defy explanation. Wrapped in enormous mucus houses of up to a meter wide, the larva floats suspended inside a mesh of tunnels and filters made by themselves and carefully sculpted to trap the particles of the water. When a house becomes clogged or breaks, The larva simply abandons it and builds another. But the discarded houses remain and, over time, move and accumulate, forming groups of ghostly architecture. In some parts of the ocean, there are entire fields of these transparent domes, which decompose and slowly collapse like ruins abandoned by a forgotten civilization. Divers have compared them to cathedrals, alien nests, jelly palaces lost in time. And inside, there are sometimes visitors, amphipods, worms, even small cephalopods that take refuge in structures never intended for them. No one knows what guides the larva's design. There is no central brain or complex nervous system. And yet, geometry is precise, efficient. It repeats itself throughout generations, a language of forms transmitted through mucus and instinct. And then there are the benthic sea cucumbers, also known as sea pigs. At first glance, they're almost comical, soft-bodied, pink and chubby, with tubular feet that look like legs. But they move in groups, hundreds at a time, migrating across the seabed in slow processions, feeding on the organic dust of the depths. When one moves, the others will follow. No eyes, no leaders, no sound, just movement, like a thought spreading through a body unaware that it has limbs. In 2009, a research drone observed a group of more than 500 sea pigs moving in synchronized lines for more than 14 hours across terrain with no food sources and no apparent destination. At the end of their journey, they stopped, forming an irregular circle and remained motionless for days. Some called it random. Others saw a pattern. In ancient mythology, creatures that moved silently and in circles were often considered signs or rituals. Perhaps it is just a projection, or perhaps the rituals of the depths are not understandable to us. Sometimes the scariest thing is not a monster. It is the feeling that something vast and ancient has a reason to move, and you're simply not able to know what it is. But even in the darkest waters, the light continues to flicker, because not everything that moves in the depths does so to feed or build. Some creatures act. Let's take the Atala jellyfish, for example. When attacked, this creature does not back down. Instead, it flashes in a brilliant spiral of blue bioluminescence, a burst of pulsating, swirling light so bright that it scares predators and attracts larger ones. The Atala does not ask for help, but chaos. It provokes violence in exchange for escaping, an exchange that has been perfected. It does not resist. It redirects. And the further you go, the more creatures you find that have evolved not to survive by fighting, but by controlling the story told around them. And then we come to one of the most disturbing of all, the one unofficially called the crystal crawler, observed only once in 2013 during a descent into the Mariana Trench. The images were damaged, the lighting was poor, but the creature was clearly visible, a segmented, almost translucent body, with skin that shone like oil and curved the light around itself. It moved across the seabed with legs too long for its body, which bent and extended like a mechanical spider made of jelly. Its head, or what appeared to be its front, was smooth. It had no mouth or eyes, but the way it leaned toward the submersible gave the strong impression of being watched. Its movements did not resemble those of any biological being. They seemed measured, as if imitating locomotion, as a form coated with the idea of an animal. The video cut off seconds later. The submersible was recovered without damage, but the memory module containing the complete images had been damaged, physically melting from the inside. A chemical reaction had occurred, apparently caused by the pressure, but the immersion had not been carried out at a critical depth, and the damage was limited to the chip. Nothing else was affected. Some believe that the crystal crawler is not real, that it is just a failure, a trick of the light. But the pilot who saw it refused to submerge again. In his official report, he wrote something simple but chilling. I knew he had seen me and let me go. In the depths, we hope to find stillness. We believe that darkness must be still. But the truth is that the bottom of the ocean is alive in a way we cannot understand. It does not move fast. It does not roar, but it moves in patterns, in pulses, in slow drifts and sudden changes. There are things that should be dead but are not. things that should be buried but rise up, things that were never alive but mimic life anyway, hoping something will look their way, because down here movement is not an accident, it is an invitation. Part 5. They move in silence because they can afford to imagine themselves sinking into a part of the ocean so deep that no storm, no current, no vessel built by man has ever reached. Down here, more than 11 kilometers deep, time does not pass by hours. It unfolds in silence. Creatures do not move because they are in a hurry. They move because they are safe. Because when the water is calm and the light has gone out and the pressure is so high that the molecules themselves are altered by it, only those who have mastered the art of waiting can afford to roam. And some of them do not look like animals at all. The blob catfish, for example, is one of the most unassuming deep-sea fish ever discovered. Its face is fallen, its body flaccid. It floats just above the ocean floor, motionless as a pile of discarded meat, but is not dead. It is watching. For hours, even days, the puffer fish will remain in the same position, floating over its own group of eggs, protecting them with a stillness that seems more spiritual than instinctive. Other fish abandon their offspring to the currents, but the sphinx fish waits, not out of affection. There's no place for feelings here, but for knowledge, since it has learned that in the depths patience is not just a virtue. It is a weapon. Then there is the ghost shark, also called chamare. More related to sharks and rays than to bony fish, the ghost shark is covered in pale, shiny skin. Its fins, wide and undulating, look like cloth. But what is most disturbing are its eyes, those huge reflective green discs. Not because they are threatening, but because they are too open, they are too big, as if the creature existed solely to receive impressions of the world, and not to interact with it. And maybe that's how it is. Ghost sharks do not chase or ambush. They glide along the seabed as if picking up whispers. And when disturbed, they disappear into the darkness like a thought you don't want to have again. But even stranger are the comb jellies, creatures that resemble jellyfish, but are much older in the history of evolution. They float with rows of tiny sighs along their sides that refract and scatter light into brilliant rainbows. It is not bioluminescence, but true diffraction. They are like chandeliers adrift in a sunken ballroom. Most comb jellies are harmless and feed on plankton. But in the depths, there are other larger ones, which move through underwater pits and valleys. Wide-mouthed and transparent, they pulse gently in long waves. They don't sting. They wrap. Their prey does not realize what is happening until it is already inside. And there are unconfirmed, unrecorded stories, but told in whispers, of conical jellyfish caught in nets at 5,000 m deep that extended beyond the boat. Fragile, yes, but infinite. Their bodies collapsed as they were dragged to the surface, reduced to water and decomposed tissue in a matter of minutes. But before they did, they revealed something no one expected. Embedded in the gelatin were small shapes, which were not bones or organs, but structures. Some compared them to seeds, others to cysts. A diver, after helping to recover the net, simply said, "It was not fishing. It was collection. No sample was preserved." Now, imagine the deep-sea lizardfish. It has a long, narrow body and a mouth full of translucent fangs. But its most terrifying feature is not its teeth. It is that it does not blink. Their eyes are permanently open, very wide and glassy, reflecting the slightest bioluminescence. It swims slowly, mouth slightly agape, scanning for movement. Neither color nor shape, only movement. It attacks anything that moves in front of it, not randomly, but with speed, precision, and silence. Lizardfish are known to consume prey almost their own size, and then sink motionless to the bottom of the sea for days while they digest. Swimming next to one is like already being inside its memory. And there are others even less known, less categorized. Divers who have worked with deep ROVs speak of inverted organisms, creatures that seem normal at first, but whose internal organs seem to float within their bodies, connected by tendrils of gelatinous matter. Some move in spirals, others in slow, ascending lines. One described a creature similar to a jellyfish with its skeleton on the outside, like a ribbed lantern. These sightings usually occur right before the equipment fails. The energy runs out, the lights flicker, as if the mere presence of these entities deformed something. Not physically, but fundamentally. The scariest thing about the deep sea is not just what we find, but what it seems to know about us watching. On several occasions, underwater recording devices have captured rhythmic pulses too slow for machinery and too regular to be natural. The pulses begin as the probe descends. They stop when it's removed. At first, scientists thought they were due to mechanical resonance. But then it happened again with new devices in different oceans in different years with the same pulse and same pattern. And just once, the pulses ended with something else. A silence so complete that the hydrophones recorded zero signals for 12 seconds. It was not ambient noise nor silence. It was zero, as if the water itself had ceased existing. The term used by technicians was black void. They cannot explain it and have not found it since. But in all the laboratories where the acoustics of the oceanic depths are studied, there's a kind of superstition. If the data goes completely silent, there is nothing for celebration. You should not assume that the equipment is broken. Sometimes silence is the message. And all these creatures, these beings adrift, watching, waiting, share one characteristic. They do not rush. They don't get scared. Because down here, movement isn't about getting somewhere. It's about resistance. They move in centuries, in slow haunts that can last months, in dances of phosphorescence older than the continents. And that slowness, that grace isn't weakness, it's confidence. Because nothing down here is afraid of you. They drift in silence because they can afford to. Part 6. Faces that should never be seen in the deep sea. There are creatures with faces, not in the human sense, but in the disturbing, visceral sense with which the mind interprets the familiar where it shouldn't exist. Faces that seem like frozen expressions at the wrong moment. Mouths that do not close. Eyes that protrude too much. Skin stretched too tight over bones, cartilage, or something worse. These faces are not made for light. They are molded by pressure and time, sculpted by a darkness so absolute that biology must grope toward its function. And when the light touches them, artificial, pale, coming from submersibles or spotlights, they do not seem grateful, but insulted, as if you had forced something to become visible that should have remained hidden. One of the most infamous is the frilled shark, often called a living fossil, not because it looks old, but because it has the anatomy of something ancient and unfinished. Its mouth opens vertically like a zipper opening in the center. Inside there are rows and rows of trident-shaped teeth hooked inward, designed not to kill quickly, but to ensure that nothing escapes once trapped. Nothing with slow, serpentine movements like an eel. Its long body is wrapped in folds of skin. Its eyes reflect a dull, turbid glow, too small for its face, too calm for its design. And when it opens its jaws, it does not bite or snap. It opens like a trapdoor in a dream. Then there is the goblin shark. Pink-skinned, it moves slowly and has a snout like a blade and jaws that launch forward with a slingshot motion to catch its prey. Most sharks depend on speed or stealth. The goblin shark depends on precision. Its jaws extend a third of its head, attacking with a sudden movement and retreating quickly. To see it feed is to see how a face transforms, twists, extends, and becomes something completely different for only a second before returning to a form never meant to be stable. Some scientists describe the mechanics of its jaw as prehensile. Others prefer the term arm bone. It is literally a face that attacks, but there are worse things. The bearded devil, a species of anglerfish, is rarely seen alive. The females, huge in comparison to the males, float with a lure that extends from the head, with luminous bacteria at the tip that pulse with a cold chemical light. Underneath the lure, there is an open face with curved, translucent, and always visible teeth. But the horror of the anglerfish is not its lure or teeth. It is what happens when a male finds one. The male, tiny, blind, and helpless, bites the female and never lets go. Over time, his body merges with hers. His eyes dissolve. His brain dies. His organs rot. He becomes part of her body, providing sperm in exchange for surviving. And sometimes more than one male merges, a group of mouths permanently attached to a single female adrift who no longer swims, just floats, waiting with a face of constant hunger and flesh never meant to share. At greater depths, we find creatures without defined shape, like the calderiform jellyfish, a rare species filmed only once near the Kurd Trench. Its bell shone red, bordered by pale white spots pulsing in sequence. From the bell hung not tentacles, but a central stem, a thick muscular appendage extending downward and ending in an orifice. It was not a mouth, nor a duct, but something between. And when it opened, there was nothing inside. No light, just absence. The jellyfish did not use this structure to feed or move. It simply kept it open as it floated, as if inviting something. And when a small fish passed through it, yes, it passed through, because that is what happened. The stem closed like a mouth around an idea. The fish never came out. The scientist who reviewed the images discussed whether it was predation or filter feeding. But one biologist, calm, serious, and not given to speculation, simply said that it was not eating, it was accepting. Not all faces in the depths are part of the head. The Scott planines, commonly known as sea pigs, have their mouths on the underside of their bodies. But above, along the top, they have two strange, swollen structures initially thought to be gills, but some scanners suggest they react to movement. Not to touch, not to pressure, only to presence. One theory proposes these structures are tuned to bioelectric fields, the faint pulses emitted by living organisms. Like nerves without a brain, they extend, not to understand you, but to feel that you exist. And if you have ever looked at a creature and felt that it knew something that you did not, that is what you would feel when seeing a sea pig move slowly, without worries, sure of itself. Because in the depths, consciousness needs no language. Sometimes it needs only skin. There is also the mirror fish, a species that lives in the depths and has reflective scales so perfect that they reflect almost all light. But the disturbing thing is not its brightness. It is the lack of detail. When you look at one, you only see the distortion of yourself, your lights, your submarine, your own outline bouncing off a body that refuses to be seen as such. It imitates everything, not because it wants to hide, but because it refuses to be defined. A reflection, a decoy, a silence that pretends to be form. A researcher joked that it is the aquatic version of a mask. Another, less humorous, pointed out that predators never seem to catch one. And perhaps it is because predators also hesitate when they see themselves reflected. But the most disturbing of all may be the faceless eel, rediscovered during an exploration of a trench in 2017. When they took it to the surface, it looked like a melted ghost, without visible eyes, without a clear mouth, only a body that narrowed to a gelatinous fin. But more detailed examination revealed that its face had not disappeared. It had simply retracted inward. The bones had collapsed. The features had folded under the translucent skin. You could still see the trace of a mouth turned inward, like a wound that had never fully opened. Some animals avoid light. This one seemed to reject it. Its organs were still alive, beating weakly under its skin, but its face had disappeared. It had been torn off. Not with violence. Over time, faces in the depths are useless for communication. They do not smile. They do not warn. They exist only as tools. Parts of machines designed to detect, trap, dissolve. And when we illuminate them with our lights, they do not flinch because they do not care how we see them. They were never designed to be seen. Seventh part, the hunger that waits without form. In the deepest parts of the ocean, beyond where even the most audacious machines can navigate comfortably, there are regions not only unexplored but unimaginable, where the pressure does not only crush, it reshapes, where matter dissolves, not because of the temperature, but because the weight of the world above is simply too much for flesh, metal, or thought. Down here, the idea of a creature becomes unstable. You start to find things that do not seem alive as we know them. things that do not swim, crawl, or float. They exist in complete silence, and their presence is only noticed by absence, by what disappears around them. They are beings that we do not classify, not because we do not try, but because our language, our taxonomies, our biological frameworks were not built to handle them. They have no spines, no eyes, not even symmetry. Some have no cells in the traditional sense, but we find them by accident, always on the sonar, in corrupted images, in the interrupted paths of animals that disappear without a trace, and sometimes in the things that reach the shore hollow without having been devoured. Let's consider the case of the D47 anomaly, recorded during a survey by several agencies in the Sea of Filipinas. The autonomous robot that they deployed reached a platform at 10,400 m deep, where it began to record flashes of movement just outside its vision. The infrared cameras captured undulating, slow, rhythmic movements without propulsion, but they did not come from any living being. They were a part of the water itself. Pressure waves that folded and unfolded in place, as if something enormous but fluid was changing shape in total silence. There was no body, no heat signature, only disturbances. Then the transmission cut off. It was not a technical failure or static, just darkness. When the tracker emerged days later, its metallic coating was deformed, not broken, but curved inward, as if something had pressed it without touching. The tracker's record showed no collision, no contact, only a last entry before blackout. A signal inversion was registered, reduction in buoyancy. The return signal was inverted, as if the water itself had begun listening. We have known for decades that organic matter in the depths decomposes differently. Bones last longer. The meat does not rot, but dissolves. And in some regions, known as black zones, whale corpses disappear in a fraction of the expected time. Scavengers do not approach. The worms that normally swarm at these feasts are absent. The seabed seems intact, but the core samples show the opposite. A strange viscosity in the silt, a presence that leaves no residue, only absence, as if something fed without interacting. There are deep-sea creatures that we call gelatinous forms, such as the deep pelagic tunicates, which float in water like translucent sacs. Most are harmless. They feed by filtration. But a rare species, never recovered intact, has earned an informal nickname among researchers, the mouthless. In 2003, a probe off the Kurd Trench recorded images of something huge and flexible in the shape of a giant spiral that rotated slowly, its outer membrane undulating. In its center was a void, not a mouth, not an opening, only an antiluminous region where all reflections disappeared. Several small fish got too close. They did not flee. They simply slowed, curved, and disappeared into the spiral. No struggle, no reaction. They were captured without violence. Some scientists believe that it was an act of feeding. Others suspect that it is a reproductive act, but a third group discreetly suggests that it is neither. That perhaps what we saw was a form of consumption still unknown. It was not energy conversion, nor digestion, only erasia. Erasia is not something we usually associate with biology. But in the depths, biology does not meet our expectations. The marine holoan, a cousin of the sea cucumbers, proves this well. Most are slow worm-like creatures, but some species have been observed to release their internal organs into the water on purpose. Not as a defense mechanism, nor by mistake. They expel the lungs, intestines, and reproductive sacs, and then absorb them again hours later. Why? We are not sure. Perhaps to clean themselves, perhaps to change shape, perhaps as a ritual. Some think it is an evolutionary adaptation for survival. Others think it is proof of a fluid identity. Organisms that rewrite themselves again and again, depending on what they need. When your home is a pit that has not changed in 100 million years, adaptation can become something more like metamorphosis. It is not difficult to imagine that this process goes further. What if there were creatures down there without a fixed form? What if the self was optional? The rumors about Entity 15 Bulby come into the scene, an unverified but often cited phenomenon, reported by a series of independent Buffalagicos monitoring stations during the last decade. The entity is never seen. It is only deduced by rapid simultaneous pressure drops followed by sudden flashes of bioluminescence in organized patterns. These flashes do not look like fish, jellyfish, or cephalopods. They resemble maps, sequences, arrays of flickering lights across kilometers of ocean. Then, nothing as if something was trying to show data, but through light and water. A station captured that pattern. When reconstructing it, it formed a complex shape, a spiral wrapped around a sphere intersected by a line. The mathematicians noticed that the geometry matched a specific three-dimensional fold called gauge, and a manifold used in string theory to describe additional dimensions. The biologists call it coincidence, but the physicists stopped talking about it. There are animals in the depths that pulse not to attract prey, but to send signals to answer us. And if that is the case, then it is not only hunger that lives down there. Their consciousness is not like ours. It does not have language, tools, or civilizations. It is something older, something that does not speak, but waits and feeds when it must, without anger, cruelty, only certainty. And so we send our machines, illuminate with our lights, record what we can frame by frame. But for every creature we identify, there are 100 that we only briefly bother and that return to plunge into darkness without leaving behind any skeleton, any body, any trace, only the sensation that something else moved and decided not to stay. Part 8. The shadows that break the silence. There is a rule among oceanographers, tacit but understood. If you stare into the depths long enough, they will stare back. Not literally, nor with eyes or expressions, but with inexplicable, subtle, strange events, as only truly alien things can. There are times when the ocean does not seem like an ecosystem or a set of life and currents. It seems like something completely different, something that watches you through the stillness, something that should never have been measured, but that endures measurement with an unsettling patience and, from time to time, response. In 2019, an underwater drone operated by a European research vessel sent images from near the Kerch Trench, about 10,800 m deep. The team was studying benthic life forms when the camera captured something strange. A region of still water, not dead water, not a cloud of sediment, but frozen. The water in a circular radius of approximately 3 m did not flow, ripple, or vibrate at all. As if time had stopped inside, the drone's lights passed through this area, and the rays bent. The light did not scatter. It curved, deforming around something that was not there. The drone tried to move closer. Its system turned off. The energy was cut off. The sensors failed. The emergency call was activated. It emerged in 20 minutes without damage. But every time they tried to play the video, they only saw a black screen with audio. 20 minutes of a soft hum, a rhythmic and deep vibration that was neither mechanical nor human. Some described it as breathing. Soon after, similar anomalies were recorded in the Java Trench and near the southern end of the Puerto Rico Trench. Always with the same profile. Water that should move but does not. Light that should scatter but folds inward. And a sound that is not transmitted through the equipment but is emitted from within. A sound that makes your hair stand on end even through a speaker. The scientists called them null zones. Unofficially, some call them listening pools because when something is sent into the ocean, it listens and sometimes responds. Then there is the black dragon fish, which elegantly embodies the cruel indifference of the depths. Its body is long, thin, and oily and shines thanks to the photophores, light-producing cells that line its sides. It uses this light to attract its prey in total darkness, flashing just enough to mimic smaller fish. But what terrifies researchers is its face. It has transparent skin all over its head. Underneath, you can see every nerve, every contraction. Its jaw can open almost twice the width of its skull, and its teeth, thin as needles, are made of a substance called nanocrystalline hydroxyapatite, invisible in the water. So the dragonfish not only shines, but its teeth do not reflect any light. Its bite is literally invisible. It can open its mouth and swallow you without you even realizing it. And there is still more. In 2005, near the Tonga Trench, a team of divers came across what they believed was the corpse of an adrift whale. But when they approached, the body began to rise vertically, not to float, without turning or current. As if they were lifting it, the team's ROV tilted over to follow it. Halfway there, the corpse suddenly accelerated upward and disappeared into darkness. No sound, no remains, it simply disappeared. Subsequent scans found no whales in the region, nor any trace of recent feeding. The ocean had recovered something that had already died, or maybe it had never been dead. These stories accumulate like sediments, slow, constant, heavy with the weight of the impossible to prove. Sometimes something real breaks through. In 2014, NOAA published data from a hydrophone that recorded a series of sounds in the Mariana Trench. Evenly spaced, low-frequency pulses. At first, they were believed geological until the patterns changed. The intervals shortened, then lengthened again in a rhythm that repeated every 32 hours for 11 days. Then silence. A year later, a similar pulse was recorded 3,000 kilometers away. The same signature, the same ascent and descent. Only this time it ended in something new. A final click, sharp, precise, of the type dolphins make. If the dolphin were 40 m long and made of steel, it would not be sonar. It was not geological, and it has never been heard again. But it's not just about sound. Visual phenomena have increased in the last decade. Recordings of lights in the deep sea that do not correspond to any known organism. It is not bioluminescence, but illumination. Bright geometric shapes, squares, rings, spirals, that expand and slowly fade. They do not move like jellyfish or siphonophores. They stand still or rotate as if projecting something. Once, when an ROV approached a spiral of blue light and passed through the center, all the compasses on board rotated simultaneously despite being digital. The gyroscopes failed. The lights flickered. The video was preserved, but the drone's propulsion system had to be rebuilt. The engineers found microscopic metal fatigue in the thrusters, patterns that would normally take decades. The drone had been in the water for 2 days. One of the most disturbing sightings remains classified, but it was leaked by a researcher in 2020. A brief clip, apparently recovered from a deep probe off the Chilean coast, shows a dark structure rising from seabed. It is not a creature, nor a rock, but something in between. It looked carved in stone, but it moved like muscle. When the ROV illuminated it, the surface shone, revealing rows of parallel, unnatural, symmetrical lines. The drone froze, and, slowly, the structure began to sink as if melting into the ground. It did not disappear. It simply decided not to stay. Nobody knows what it was. Some refuse to believe it existed. But the people who saw it do not forget it. They describe it in that same way. It seemed that it should never be found. And perhaps that is the truth of the deep. We think of the ocean as a place for exploration to conquer. But in reality, we are rivals, tourists, looking down toward a house that does not belong to us. And the things that live there, the ones that have no name, no nerves, no symmetry, are not hostile. They just wait because they can afford to, because time is theirs, because this planet was never only ours. Part 9. They were here before light. Before the continents existed, before the forests made their way through the land, or the stars were baptized by human tongues, the ocean existed. Not the ocean that we navigate and study today. Not the shallow blue skin that stretches over the surface of the earth, but something deeper, colder, wiser, an uninterrupted silence wrapped in darkness that breathes slow tides under the crust of time itself. In that blackness, life did not arise. It persisted. It waited. And what still inhabits, there has not forgotten the world before sunlight. Some scientists believe that hydrothermal vent communities were the origin of all life on Earth. That in the crushing darkness near the volcanic fissures, where boiling water met the icy abyss, cells first merged, divided, and began their slow ascent to complexity. The tube worms that thrive around these vents are relics of that era. They do not eat. They do not see. They survive exclusively thanks to chemosynthesis. The bacteria in their tissues convert hydrogen sulfide into energy. They grow up to 3 meters in length, grouped in colonies. That sway in the warm currents. Their feathers look like scarlet flags, marking some forgotten territory. And around them live beings that have not changed in hundreds of millions of years. Pale shrimp, limpets, hydrothermal vent crabs, creatures that live without sun and perhaps without time. But even these are familiar compared to what exists below them. Because there are hydrothermal vents that no man has visited, pits that no sonar has mapped well. And within those folds of the earth, there are forms that defy memory. Creatures with lineages so old that they predate even extinction. They have not evolved, they have not adapted, they have simply survived. The kind of life that does not fight to survive because it has never imagined death as a possibility. Off the coast of Antarctica, under the Ross Ice Shelf, researchers drilled nearly 900 meters through ice to study water flow. When their camera reached the oceanic cavity below, something passed in front, slow, undulating and segmented. At first, it was believed to be a worm or an eel, but when rewinding the images, something became clear. It was not swimming. It was floating in place. Its body was still. The current passed through it and its segments suddenly shifted in sequence, like a jellyfish blooming in reverse. It had no eyes or visible organs, only movement. When the team analyzed the images frame by frame, they realized that the creature had no discernible entry or exit point. It was a loop, a closed system, a body that began where it ended. One of the researchers simply said that it seemed that it had not evolved. It simply remained. These are not just strange animals. They are reminders. The amphipods at the bottom of the Mariana Trench have armor coated with aluminum extracted from sediments. Then, without any warning, it stopped. Not because it failed, but because it kept transmitting. But the signal returned blank, as if the probe continued to exist and function, but the space around it had erased all interaction. Then, just as quickly, contact reestablished. The probe moved laterally 20 kilometers in seconds. Without explanation, turbulence, only displacement. It returned intact, covered in scratches that did not correspond to any known animal, mineral, or mechanical pattern. Narrow, arched, and repetitive. When asked what could have caused it, the principal investigator just shrugged. "We didn't find anything down there," he said. "Something found us." The deeper you go, the older become the rules. The sea depths do not obey gravity in quite the same way. They do not reflect light. They do not produce echo. Down here, things have learned to live without sound, form, and identity. And that is what makes them so scary. Not because they are monsters, but because they don't need to be anything definable. They are shadows cast by a land we no longer quite remember. They were here before the light, and they will still be here when light goes out. Part 10. The depths do not forget what we bury there. The ocean swallows everything in the end. Ships, bones, machines, all secrets. It is the great destruction, not out of rage or malice, but out of time, weight, or patience. But what few people know is that sometimes the depths do not keep what they swallow. Sometimes they return them, altered, stripped, whispering, and not always when we expect it. In 2001, a mining operation in the depths of the Central Pacific recovered what it believed to be sunken equipment, a pressure-resistant casing similar to those used in the first Cold War surveillance submarines. But when they took it out, something just wasn't right. The exterior was deformed, not by pressure, but by internal heat, and the material, originally a titanium alloy, had been restructured. Its crystalline structure had changed. Metallurgists then performed tests. The patterns they found should not have been possible outside a laboratory. Neither the current, nor the bacteria, nor any natural process could have done it. And inside the casing, where there should have been machinery or wiring, there's only black slime and something harder embedded at the center. A fragment of human bone, but burned from the inside. No name, no records, just the slow return of something that should have been forgotten. This was not an isolated event. There are regions of the sea where the remains of shipwrecks return in strange ways. In 2014, a fishing boat found a section of airplane fuselage drifting near the solar trench. The markings had disappeared almost completely. The metal had been bleached when it was hoisted onto the ship. The crew found the interior surface coated with a thin, sticky film. Analyses revealed that it was not organic or bacterial. It was silicon. It was not alive, but it had a structure, a repetitive, fractal, recursive pattern. The engineers called it cold circuit. They didn't know what it meant. They still don't know. The section was removed by authorities 2 days later. No public report was ever released. These are not ghost stories. They are stories of echoes. The sea preserves memories unlike the land. When a city collapses, we excavate among rubble. When a forest burns, it grows back. But when the ocean takes something, it often disappears completely until reappearing. And what returns is never whole. It is reconfigured, as if the sea not only dissolved matter, but processed it. Let's take the story of Abyssal Bell. In the early 1990s, sonar teams working near the Peru-Chile Trench recorded a strange anomaly. A series of pings that bounced in triangular shape. Shas thought it was an error, perhaps a cave or a rock formation, but the pattern was repeated, identical each time, with perfect angles and even with the same timing. Finally, a team sent a drone to investigate. What it found was a large depression on the ocean floor, bell-shaped, wider at the top, and tapering to a sharp cone. Around it, the ground was bare. No sediments, no life, just concentric rings etched in a stone, as if something resonated there. The drone's instruments began to pick up a deep hum, neither mechanical nor natural, a pure, low tone. The longer the drone remained, the stronger signal became, until the camera began to fail. The last images show something moving in the hole, not rising, not swimming, unfolding as if space itself unraveled, and then it went blank. The drone was recovered, but its hard drive was magnetized beyond repair, not erased, rewritten, encoded with a pulse signal that did not match any known transmission. To this day, it is unknown what caused the resonance or whether it ended. Some believe that the ocean not only remembers ships and bodies. Some believe that it keeps the memory of ideas. In 2008, divers exploring a trench platform off the Azores came across a carved structure. Large slabs of stone stacked geometrically, half buried in silt, covered in strange angular markings. It did not resemble any known ruin. And most disturbingly, some markings were found inside the stone, like veins of pigment that had grown through the solid rock. When scanned with LiDAR, the marks formed a repetitive, three-dimensional glyph, like an impossible cube that could only exist from one viewing angle. And that glyph matched a symbol engraved on the side of a damaged deep-sea submersible recovered in the 1970s. A submarine whose pilot died during descent. The autopsy ruled it was heart failure, but there was no indication of stress or panic, just stillness. The symbol of the submarine was dismissed as a scratch until the ruins appeared under the Azores. So what does that mean? Maybe the ocean is not haunted. Maybe it doesn't hide monsters. Maybe it remembers, not as we remember with photographs, tunes, or maps, but with forms, with distortions, with corruption, taking what we give it, metal, sound, death, thoughts, and feeding something old, something slow with it. And when it gives it back to us, it is not out of pity. It is a message. Look at what you've left behind. And sometimes what comes back is alive. The barrel fish has a transparent head. Its eyes float inside like green spheres that rotate freely in liquid. It looks up through its own skull, searching prey. But it has a second pair of lenses, internal, that allow it to see behind it. No other vertebrate has this characteristic. It has evolved to see what follows it, what chases it, what may arise from below. Its whole body is a warning in depths. What you see is not what's coming next. What is coming is what you've missed. In 2011, a drone detected a shadow below. A long, uninterrupted silhouette, without movement, just presence. The drone turned to descend, but the shadow moved. It expanded outward. Without eyes, mouth, just darkness extended. The drone ascended. The shadow rose with it, until it collided with a thermal layer and vanished, as if it never existed. But when the drone reached the surface, its cameras worked. Its systems were functioning normally. Only the shell had changed. The heat and pressure-resistant paint had melted away. Imperfect lines circular like a fingerprint, but too big, smooth, not human. The sea returns many things. Bones, shipwreck remains, signals, stories. But most often it returns a question, and it is always the same one. Do you really think this ever disappeared? Part 11, where the current ends, but nothing rests within the ocean's architecture. The currents are its soul. They feed the corals well. They guide the migrations. They move nutrients from the abyss to the surface and return those fallen into darkness. But not everywhere now. There are hidden places in the depths, under areas of turbulence and thermal exchange, where nothing stirs. Not because the water is still, but because the laws of motion fail there. Places where a drifting object stops for no reason. Where the light dims quicker than it should. Where even sound seems reluctant to pass through. These are the places that oceanographers whisper about as null pockets. Although the name is unofficial, it is unmapped and deliberately excluded from public records. One of the first known incidents occurred in 1996, when a Japanese submarine exploring an unmapped ledge in the eyes of Bonin Trench entered what it described as a static corridor. The submarine operator, an experienced deep-sea technician, reported that the vehicle's vertical descent stopped despite no change to propulsion or buoyancy. The instruments indicated that they were still submerging down. The images confirmed that it was false. The exterior view from the submarine did not fade. It simply stopped updating then. The lights collided with something that was not a surface, but neither was it distance itself. The descent was aborted then. When they ascended and returned to port, the black box showed 4 minutes of total sensor loss. Not a failure, but a loss. The ocean stopped responding then. The images of that dive were never made public, but subsequently leaked fragments revealed that when the submarine's lights flickered due to low battery, shapes were briefly seen, not objects at all. Contours, huge and slowly curved ridges, almost organic, but too symmetrical, spaced like ribs, like the architecture of something that once beat strongly. The ocean is not flat here. It is not a bowl or tank. It is a labyrinth of folds, hollows, and dead ends. It has dead ends, and some of those ends are not empty at all. Let us consider the deep pelagic worm, a species that rarely appears in images because it cannot survive even minor changes in pressure. These worms do not have eyes or recognizable organs. They exist as bands of translucent muscles with dense hairs used to detect flow and movement. But a specimen accidentally recovered by a Russian fisherman in the Sea of Okhotsk had something no other hairy worm had embedded in its membrane. 3 perfect circles. Dark and gummy nodules aligned along its spinal column. Initially, it was believed that they were parasites. A more detailed inspection revealed that they were open and not feeding. Tunnel resonance scanners showed that each nodule emitted a hum in slightly different frequency bands. No known biological function matched the pattern, and when played back through sonar at corresponding frequencies, all laboratory tanks began to vibrate. 3 days later, all pelagic worms in containment died simultaneously. Without cause, without reaction. They simply stopped as if someone flipped a switch they didn't know existed. This is not about supernatural terror. It's about design. There are species in the depths that reflect evolution. And then there are others that suggest an intention, not of a god, nor of man, but of something else. Something that did not need to build tools or language. Something that remembers the ocean not as a home, but as a body. In 2018, during a hydroacoustic study off the coast of Madagascar, a research vessel detected a submerged object approximately 2 kilometers long, crescent-shaped. It was not rising. It was not moving, but its acoustic signature was repeating. Every 5 minutes, a pulse, not strong enough to be sonar, nor soft enough to be natural. When the vessel approached, the pulse shifted by exactly 11 milliseconds. It was not random, It was reactive. They sent an unmanned probe. The probe failed at 1,200 m. It was not a catastrophe. It simply stopped transmitting. 2 hours later, it emerged on its own. Its onboard memory had been manually erased. Only one fragment remained, a blurry and corrupt still image. But in the center of that image, if zoomed in, a shape could be seen, a familiar curvature, similar to the crescent-shaped structure of the sonar. Only now, in the photo, it was open. It is like a shell that unfolds like a door. And beyond, darkness, not black water, not emptiness. Something darker than emptiness. Perhaps the most terrifying creature recovered from the depths is not the largest or most violent, but the one that should not have survived. The deep mirror octopus, found only once at 7,000 m deep near the wall of the trench in the South Sandwich Islands. The creature had no chromatophores, nor the ability to change color. But it had something else. A skin composed of reflective cells, like layers of ultra-thin glass. It not only reflected light, but also movement. When a light source flashed in the submarine, the octopus also flashed, mimicking the pattern in reverse, as if it were not reflecting, but predicting. And when it disappeared, because that is the only way to describe what it did not swim away. It folded, its limbs curved inward, its body inverted, and it was no longer there, not even hidden. We speak of the ocean as if it were passive, as if it were a space we enter to study, harvest, and explore. But sometimes it seems less like an environment and more like a memory, something that maintains its shape as long as it needs to, and then changes when it decides it no longer wants to be known. There are stories of submersibles lost, not due to failures, but due to confusion, of lights that disappear behind the silt and were not there, of shadows that move in grids, of walls of pits that buzz through the vents, not by movement, but by intention where the current ends. Nothing rests. Wait. Remember what it swallowed and decide, in its own time, whether to keep it. Part 12. The places that should not be cold. There are regions of the ocean where temperature ceases to make sense. Places where cold is not only the absence of heat, but a presence in itself, dense, deliberate, and suffocating. They can be found in all ocean basins, hidden behind mountain ranges, nestled in collapsed caverns, or accumulating in ancient depressions that have not seen the surface in millions of years. In these places, the instruments do not fail, but return values that scientists discreetly archive under phrases such as local anomaly or extreme deviation of the thermocline. Because what they record is not only colder than expected, it is colder than should be possible, beyond the reach of known physics. It is as if something were extracting heat from the water, not dispersing it, but feeding on it. In 2004, a team of divers exploring the South Sandwich Trench deployed a probe in an alleged methane leak. Instead, they found a platform similar to a cavern hidden under loose sediment, which extended along almost 600 m. When the probe entered the chamber, all external thermometers began to register a rapid descent. It was not a gradual cooling, but a sudden, linear drop. The temperature dropped 7 degrees Celsius in less than 10 seconds. The whites began to fade. The probe's battery, designed for 40 hours of operation, ran out in 16 minutes. What returned to the surface was a hole covered in frost, not because of the ambient cold, but because of internal condensation. The probe had cooled from the inside, as if something had extracted heat through the housing and chamber records. The last 10 seconds were unreadable. Blank, corrupted, not by the impact, but by the overcompression of data, as if the digital signal had been physically squeezed in a blank. It was not an isolated case. 2 years later, a deep survey under the Sea of Sulu located what they believed was an extinct hydrothermal vent. But when the surrounding water was analyzed, an inverted thermocline was observed, which means that the deeper the probe went, the colder it got. At 6,000 m, the sensors absorbed minus 21 degrees Celsius below the freezing point of seawater. But it was not freezing. There was no ice, just a dark and still liquid. In dim light, thick with suspended particles and a faint, persistent hum, barely perceptible. Diverse never went down. The project ended 6 days later, citing budget exhaustion. but internal memos referred to something stranger. The pressure readings in white did not match the ocean profile. Blank, as if the water was not pressing down, but something below was pulling up. The creatures in these areas do not behave like the others. They do not flee from the light. They do not react to sound. The golden shark discovered near a glacial, saltwater pool in the Arctic Ocean. In white did not swim. In white moved without propulsion. In white. One of the researchers brought it on board. It was alive. Its heart was beating slowly but steadily. Its flesh was frozen, colder than the water around it, but somehow still soft, still with blood flowing through it. In its stomach were the remains of a species of squid unknown to science, with cartilage different from that of any other cephalopod, twisted in the shape of a corkscrew. Blank coiled around nothing. When dissected, its internal cavity was empty. Blank, without a digestive tract, without organs, only membrane. A biologist described it as a mouth that never became anything more. The cold in these places feels intelligent. It attacks. It persists. It waits. There are testimonies from submersible pilots who report a sudden fog inside their sealed cabins despite complete environmental control. Breath condenses in the still air. The screens slow for no mechanical reason. One described it as being perceived by a location. Another, in his diary, wrote, "The white was not the darkness that scared me. It was the cold, not because I felt it, but because I knew something else needed it." Certain jellyfish, specifically the white ones, those of the genus Stygia medusa, have only been observed in areas colder than freezing. Their bodies measure meters across and have 4 arms longer than a man's height, which drag behind them like dripping banners. But these jellyfish do not pulse, do not swim. They hang in the air, suspended in the cold. From time to time, one twists on itself, contracting not inwards, but outward. Their tissues fold like cloth pierced by a ring. Some believe that this is how they move. Others think it is a form of camouflage, imitating something the ocean no longer wants us to see. The most chilling thing is reports of cold echoes. These are not sounds, but sudden bursts of icy water that appear on thermocline scanners. Waves of cold propagate from a fixed point, traveling faster than they should. With no apparent source, the water in front cools before coming into contact. The temperature behind then returns to normal. It's as if something were passing through in white. Not made of mass, but of absence. Not of matter, but of memory. What kind of creature could thrive in places like that? What kind of biology evolves not only to withstand cold, but to generate it? Some researchers discreetly propose that these anomalies are the result of thermal siphons, organisms or mechanisms that extract energy not to survive, but to contain it. That perhaps the cold is not its fuel, but its prison. That what we are observing is not life, but isolation. And every time we lower a probe, we make a dent in that seal. There is a phrase that has begun to appear in deep-sea research circles, never written in articles, always shared over drinks or during off-the-record interviews. The silent tide. It refers to a point located about 8,000 m deep, where the audio stops recording correctly, where the water loses its echo, where even the hum of the submarine fades, and all that remains is a silence so complete that it seems sculpted. It is not the silence of the absence of sound. It is the silence that someone else is already listening to. We send our machines to these places because we can't help it. We pursue knowledge like heat in a cold room, desperate to find form in a world that resists understanding. But some forms are only visible in stillness. Some knowledge is only expressed through subtraction. And in places that shouldn't be cold, where nothing grows, where heat dissolves, and where our own instruments flicker hesitantly, we're starting to hear something louder than noise. The deep does not need to shout. It only waits in silence, patiently, and when the temperature drops enough, it responds in kind. Part 13. What the ocean does not let surface. Not everything that enters the ocean is lost forever. Some things return, marked, transformed, or half forgotten by the surface world. But there is another, completely different category. Things that try returning, but cannot. shipwrecks that rise with currents only to disappear before recovery, unidentified sonar contacts that head toward the surface and then reverse course in a way that defies both buoyancy and propulsion. Creatures half captured by the lenses of the cameras, whose forms are distorted as they ascend, as if they were undone the closer they get to the light. Perhaps the deepest truth is not that the ocean keeps secrets, but that it rejects their revelation. In 1983, a Soviet exploration platform operating in the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench detected an anomaly ascending at approximately 6,700 m. It had no trace of propulsion or thermal signature, but it ascended steadily at 5 meters per second, faster than any known whale or submersible could safely ascend. When it passed the 4,000-meter mark, the sonar image began to disintegrate, not into pieces, but into patterns. What had appeared as a solid body became a cloud of superimposed, erratic forms. The technicians thought that the target had disintegrated, but when the object passed the 2,000-meter line, it reformed again, whole and singular. Only this time it was smaller, more narrow. The form now curved, thinned, with movements that resembled a squid or ribbon eel. At 500 m, the contact disappeared completely. Hours later, a crew member on the deck of a nearby fishing boat reported seeing something break the surface just before dawn. There was no splash, no sound, just a flash in the air as if the sea trembled. Then silence. No remains were ever found. The sonar records were filed. The event was classified as an unresolved aquatic distortion. Decades later, in the same region, the pattern repeated during a Chinese deepwater mining operation. An automated extraction unit broke loose from its mooring and began ascending uncontrollably. When the control team tried to override the system, all the entries failed. At 900 m, the unit began to rotate slowly at first, then violently, rotating on an axis that did not coincide with the currents. When it reached 400 m, the cameras broke. A still image transmitted before the transmission was interrupted. It showed a dark, translucent mass pressed against the lens. It was not flesh, nor water, but visible pressure, as if the ocean itself had extended its arms to pull the machine down. Recovery attempts were made, but nothing was found. The sea had swallowed the device completely. It had not drifted away. It had not been lost. It had been denied. Creatures have also been captured by this phenomenon. In 1997, researchers near the Puerto Rico Trench managed to capture a live specimen of an uncommon benthic octopod, a pale, elongated species with delicate arms and thin, curtain-shaped membranes. When it was brought to the surface in a pressurized tank, observers noted that its behavior remained calm, but something changed above the thermocline. The creature began losing cohesion, not physically, but in its behavior. Its arms retracted inward, curling on themselves in unnatural spirals. Its skin went from pearl white to obsidian black, and then to bright silver. When it reached the surface, it had stopped moving. The pressure in the tank was the same. The water temperature was stable, but the creature was unwell. Its tissues, once flexible and elastic, were now rigid. Its eyes, once large and active, were cloudy. The autopsy revealed no trauma or disease. But when the researchers performed a biopsy, the cell structure had changed. The DNA sequences had become unstable, as if the genetic code itself had tried to rewrite itself or revert to what they could not say. The ocean does not only preserve, it conditions, it alters, and for some organisms, perhaps for some things, leaving that condition is not only dangerous, it is lethal, or worse still, it is revealing. There are unverified stories of divers who have encountered creatures that behave as if they were trying to flee from the surface. One account describes a translucent, eel-like form seen coiled around a submersible's cable. It did not attack. It did not flee. It simply remained floating with its mouth open, as if absorbing vibrations. When the submersible began to ascend, the creature followed it until it reached a certain depth. Then it recoiled violently, not from the pressure, but because of something else. The pilot said that it was as if the water around him had changed, not in temperature or clarity, but in state of mind. Years later, that diver would describe the sensation not as fear, but as shame, as if they had witnessed something sacred in a place that forbade remembrance. The deepest possibility is this. Some inhabitants of the ocean have not only adapted to the depth, they are defined by it. They do not tolerate the surface because it is not their domain, neither physically nor conceptually. They exist in a state of deep identity completely molded by darkness, weight, and silence. They are what they are because the ocean allows it. And when we try to take them out of that context, when we try to drag them into our kingdom, they do not survive, or even worse, they become something we cannot understand. What if these depths are not only dangerous, but territorial? Not in the sense that a predator marks its territory, but that a vault guards what should never be opened. What if the surface world not only ignores the depths, but is forbidden to know their true nature? The more we try to bring the depths to light, the more they slip through our fingers and, sometimes, escape on purpose. Because not everything in the ocean is meant to be seen. And what emerges may not remain what it was, or may reveal something about us we did not expect to discover. The ocean has many faces. It reflects. It hides. It transports. But there are things that it simply does not let escape. Not to preserve them, nor to protect them, but to prevent it. Because there are things down there, not only monsters, not only anomalies, that do not want to be known. And, what is even more terrifying, they're not the only ones who want that. The ocean itself agrees. Part 14. Those who venture too far into the depths. Among deep-sea researchers, there is the disturbing certainty that the most terrifying creatures are not those that hide in caves or inhabit black waters waiting. They are the ones that move slowly, silently, without destination. Creatures that do not stalk or sleep, that do not hunt or hide. They simply float like a thought that the ocean has not finished thinking. And when they pass, they leave behind something stranger than fear. Silence. Not only stillness, but a silence that goes into your bones. A silence that follows you home. In 2010, a NOAA expedition in the Philippine Trench recorded a sonar trail 27 kilometers long and only 3 m wide, which moved laterally at a constant speed of 0.8 knots. It presented no indication of propulsion, no fluctuation in depth, and did not deviate from its trajectory, not even to avoid the trench wall's irregular terrain. For 2 days, it maintained this impossible line. Then, at 8:37 p.m., on the third day, the signal disappeared. It did not fade. It was cut off. The last ping was recorded near a pronounced descent of the seabed, where the trench plunged into a rarely explored fold known by locals as the throat of the world. What made the trail so disturbing was not only its scale or precision, but the harmonics it left behind. The sonar repeaters recorded a persistent vibration in the water column for hours afterward. It was not a sound, a frequency, an inaudible noise, a pressure oscillation, but as if the ocean continued reacting to something that had moved through it. Like the air that continues vibrating after a supersonic plane passes overhead. Only this was water. It was deeper, older. The local fishermen, when interviewed later, shrugged. They called it the sleeper. Something that wakes only to stretch. That is all they said. But this is not folklore. It is a pattern. Years before, a Norwegian bottom fishing boat near the Greenland Sea encountered something it could not explain. Their nets, with a capacity of almost 100 tons, returned twisted, not broken, but braided. The ropes were bent into symmetrical loops intertwined with each other in patterns that looked like Celtic knots. The teenager thought it was sabotage, but they were 200 nautical miles from the nearest ship in weather conditions so adverse that not even the birds were flying. Tied to the knot that had gotten caught in one of the loops was a fish that no one could identify. It had pale blue skin and lacked scales. Its mouth had no teeth, but its entire body was covered in gill-like rings, although dry. The animal was dead. Its body did not decompose, but hardened, fossilizing from the inside out. It was as if something had come out of the pit, touched its line, and left a message, and then released it. What makes the deep sea terrifying is not just the pressure or the darkness. It is that down there, movement is not measured by aggression or flight. It is its purpose. The creatures of the abyss do not run. They float. They cross great distances without changing speed, without reacting to being observed. And yet, when we look at them, we feel that they are watching us. Not with the eyes, but with intention. In the South Atlantic, near the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a research drone captured a biological signal they called the cylinder. The nickname comes from its reflection on the sonar, a tall, narrow shape, perfectly vertical, descending at a speed too fast to be drift and too slow to be a free fall. It had no flares, no limbs, no fins, but it was not falling. It was placed like something returning to its place of origin. And when it reached a certain depth, something more than 9,000 m, the signal reversed, not in movement, but in structure. The vertical signal rotated on the sonar. Its top became the bottom and began to pulse slowly as if breathing. No image was preserved. All the cameras went blank during the event, even though there was no electronic interference. But the sound was recorded. A dull and rhythmic noise, almost cardiac, almost tectonic, resonated through the speakers. The frequency makes the room shake, not hard, but enough for the technicians to report that they felt it in their ribs. There are creatures in the ocean that do not seek light or food or even other creatures like them. They move because they must, not out of hunger or curiosity, but by design. And when they pass, the world curves around them. The currents change. The pressure changes. As if the ocean had to make room for their presence. As if it still remembered them. One of these creatures, if they can be called that, was seen off the coast of Chile during a rare clear sky jump. Just after the twilight zone, at 1,000 m of depth, a long shape slid beneath the submarine. The crew described it as a smokescreen. It had no head or eyes, only bands of translucent flesh that rippled like a parachute under black ink. But what chilled the crew was not its shape, but what accompanied it. For 18 minutes, all the lights on the submarine dimmed. The battery voltage remained constant. The instruments continued to function, but the luminosity faded. It was like being through layers of soot. The thing never touched them. But when it passed, everyone reported the same sensation, forgetting where they were. A moment of total displacement, as if they had been somewhere else and did not remember leaving. After surfacing, their surveillance logs had a 7-minute lag. Not missing, they were repeated. The same entries written twice in the same handwriting by the same person, but with different expressions. One record ended with, "I think it's gone." The duplicate ended with, "I think it's Saurus." And that is the truth that lurks in the depths. It is not that there are things living there, but that some of them travel, and when they do, the ocean shifts to let them pass. It does not resist. It does not record. It only adapts, as if it had seen them before, as if it remembered their paths. We often talk about the sea as a place where life began, but we rarely ask ourselves what was there before life. What floated in the darkness before the cells divided and thoughts formed. Those who do not move with violence or fear. Those who float. Too deep to resurface unless they want to. And when they do, the ocean follows them in silence. As if it also remembered who built the darkness. Part 15. When the sea opens its eyes, there are moments in the depths when the stillness is so absolute that it begins to feel like anticipation. When the light from the submersibles dims, not because of the pressure or the sediments, but because something is watching them. The deeper the dive, the more frequent these moments are. However, they remain misunderstood, unstudied, not formally recognized. Because admitting that the ocean is watching us is admitting that we are not as alone as we believe. That intelligence and attention might not be exclusive to minds that think like ours. In 2006, a submersible exploring the Cayman Trench reported an encounter with a formation that initially looked like a ledge next to the trench. A wide concave dome encrusted with ancient sediments, corals, and filter feeder colonies. The standard procedure for geological analysis was initiated. Laser scanners, LAR bursts, sonar mapping. But the The sonar signal was behaving strangely. Each pulse returned with slight distortions, increasingly symmetrical, as if the surface was not echoing the sound, but adapting to it. Then, without warning, the entire formation shifted. It did not collapse. It contracted, receding toward the wall of the trench without disturbing the surrounding water, like a pupil narrowing at a sudden brightness. The operator watching the live broadcast was heard whispering. It blinked. The immersion was aborted. The video was erased, but two crew members later reported headaches and mild disorientation for several weeks. One described recurring dreams in which he was underwater in total darkness, unable to move, not paralyzed, but held, suspended in the cold, not by force, but by the weight of something watching him. It was not hostile, just aware. They said the dreams only ceased when they went inland and stayed away from the open sea. The ocean's capacity to camouflage life is legendary. But in recent decades, researchers have begun to document something stranger than invisibility. False environments, places in the sea where instruments register normal conditions. However, something just does not add up. Colors subtly changing in each frame, shadows that do not match their sources, and in some cases, reflections in the water where there should be no reflective surface. In the Tonga Trench, a probe captured images of what seemed to be an enormous dome at 7,000 m. Its surface shone like oil on glass. But when the lights were directed at it, there were no reflections, only darkness. However, from a side view, the lights themselves and the body of the probe were seen perfectly reflected in the curve. And strangest of all, the reflected image kept moving, even when the probe stopped. A delay of 6 seconds was observed, enough to show that the probe blinked, turned, and moved after doing so in real time, as if something observed and fed back the memory of being observed. The team called the phenomenon echo vision anomaly and classified the place as confidential. But the images exist, and by slowing them down, you can see something else in the reflection. A third light, which does not come from the probe or any known equipment, blinks, pulses like an eye observing under the water. The idea that the ocean observes us is no longer just a metaphor. It begins to seem anatomical. We have discovered species with distributed brains, octopuses that can think with their tentacles, jellyfish that navigate without a central nervous system. We have map currents that flow with complex rhythms responding to lunar cycles, tectonic pulses, and even planetary magnetism. What if what we call the deep sea is not only a space, but a body? What if each trench, each platform, each swarm of drifting bioluminescence is a kind of nerve ending, a set of sensors, not a collection of separate lives, but a vast, slow entity that perceives us as we perceive a grain of dust when it falls into our eye? In 2019, some researchers working at an Icelandic marine station were monitoring the layers of the thermocline near the Reykjanes mountain range. They observed rhythmic fluctuations in pressure and temperature during a 14-hour cycle. But these pulses did not coincide with the tides, lunar phases, or geothermal events. They were too perfect, too mechanical. A member of the team suggested, half-jokingly, that they resembled the patterns of an electrocardiogram, like a heartbeat. That night, the underwater microphones captured a new sound. It was not the familiar murmur of the earth or the chirping of distant marine life. It was a single resonant, deep, and precise blow. It was repeated 4 times, and then there was silence. The team assumed that it was equipment failure. But when they reproduced the recording with frequency isolation software, something emerged beneath the main wave. A voice, not a language, nor words, only a form. A pattern repeated at 22 hertz, coinciding exactly with the harmonic frequency of the human heart. And then there are the visions. Divers who return from extreme depths have long reported brief, intrusive hallucinations, shapes glimpsed from the corner of the eye, distant pulses of blue or red, the sensation of being watched. These sensations were dismissed as narcosis, a trick of nitrogen saturation. But the new breathing mixtures have reduced those effects. And, nevertheless, the reports continue, now more vivid and specific. Multiple divers in different parts of the world had described a sensation that they find difficult to express with words, as if they were reflected, not copied, nor reflected, but followed backwards. A hand moves, and something somewhere moves backwards, as if imitating its actions, not from the front, but from within. And the sea is always calm when this happens. Keep watching. What if the reason why much of the ocean remains unexplored is not because it is inaccessible, but because it does not want to be reached? What if it only allows showing what it decides? What if the creatures we find, those translucent and bright things, are not its inhabitants, but its thoughts, its dreams, fleeting and momentary expressions of something vaster than biology? We are arrogant to assume that ours is the only type of consciousness, that eyes are needed to see, that intelligence must walk, build, or speak. But if the ocean has lived for 4 billion years without changing unfathomable, why would it not start noticing us? And perhaps it always has been. Perhaps each ripple that we provoke, each frequency that we send, each machine that we submerge in its depths is not exploration. It is irritating. And now it returns the gaze to us, not with hate or curiosity, only awareness. Because sometimes, when you stare too long at darkness, the sea opens its eyes. Part 16. Under the silence, something waits. There are levels of stillness in the ocean that most never experience. It is not the soft whisper of superficial waves, nor the muffled stillness of calm nights at sea, but something deeper. An oppressive stillness settles like dust in the mind, a silence that lacks not only sound, but seems to press inward from all sides. It is the silence of abyss, the kind of silence that swallows memories, distorts time, and makes even experienced deep-water pilots forget why they descended in the first place. It is in that silence where many now believe something ancient waits, not asleep, but listening. In 2012, a private research expedition, funded by an independent oceanographic institute, conducted bathymetric mapping near the Diamantina Fracture Zone in the eastern Indian Ocean. The team deployed a set of towed sonars at great depth to map the collapsed seabed ridges. However, for several hours, the data was normal, and suddenly, there was a sudden drop, an impossibly symmetrical depression more than 2 kilometers long, perfectly oval with walls so smooth that they reflected the sonar in uniform and sharp bands. A technician joked that it seemed man-made. But the laughter did not last, because the system's sensors, designed to pick up even the slightest sound at more than 1.5 kilometers deep, stopped working. There was no signal, no interference, just silence. When the system was collected, the cables were intact, but the listening equipment was slightly deformed. It had blisters from heat and marks from cold, as if it had gone through extreme conditions that should not coexist. And the most disturbing thing was that the microphone housing was empty. The hydrophone had disappeared. It was not broken or cracked. It had simply been removed. The housing was still sealed, with the screws tightened. There was no indication of manipulation, but there was no explanation either. That night, the crew reported trouble sleeping, not out of fear, but because of nightmares. The same dream was shared by several members. In it, they floated in the open sea, kilometers above the seabed, looking down toward the trench. Only down there, it was not dark. It was illuminated by a soft blue light, and something huge and slow circled toward them. It was not a creature. It was a form, like a building made of water and bones. They woke in unison. The navigation log noted the time, 3:14 a.m. At that same moment, the sonar station, which had been turned off during the night, activated on its own and transmitted a beep. The sound that was heard wasn't static. It was not even mechanical. It was a breathing sound. And the more the team listened, the more convinced they were that what they had recorded was not a sound traveling through water. It was a sound waiting within it. Null zones in the ocean have long been reported. Places where radio waves, sonar, and even light behave unpredictably. Ships that lose the precision of the compass. Submersibles that deviate slightly from their course despite the precision of the thrusters. Divers who emerge kilometers from their intended position. In most cases, the anomalies are dismissed as magnetic interference, thermal currents, or simple human error. But when the data is collected and the locations cross-referenced, a pattern begins to emerge. These null zones form an approximate ring, not a perfect circle, but a perimeter, a wide irregular boundary that extends through multiple trenches and fracture zones. And in its center is what marine geophysicists have come to call the silent field, a region of the deep ocean where nothing natural has been recorded. No whale songs, no tectonic noises, not even microbial bottom gases, nothing. Only silence. And the few times researchers have tried to study it, their equipment has failed in increasingly disturbing ways. A probe sent in 2017 by a university research team returned from the quiet field covered in thin black film. They were not algae. It was not silt. Under the microscope, it seemed organic but not living. The structure was formed by chains of repeated proteins that wrapped empty carbon skeletons, like a cell never born. Even worse, the probe's casing showed no contamination signs upon entering. The film had formed only after reaching its deepest point, as if it had grown on the metallic surface, as if the ocean tried to cover or mark the intrusion. Another probe deployed 2 years later did not return, not because it had been lost, but because it sent one last message. Stop descent, presence below. An inversion of forms has been detected. Then silence. No one could explain what inversion of forms meant. It was not a predetermined warning. It wasn't even a programmed phrase. It had been written manually by the onboard AI assistant, an autonomous learning module intended to interpret anomalies in language understandable to humans. And what it saw, detected, or imagined led it to describe the unknown with only 2 words: presence below. So we wonder what awaits us in silence. Why does the ocean preserve certain areas from noise, from contact, even from the most basic biological trace? The sea has always been a place of transition between land and life, between heat and cold, between the surface and the deep. But what if some parts are not intended for us? Not only inaccessible, but impossible to share. What if something else has always owned that silence, and we have simply confused its patience with permission? Because the sea does not make mistakes. Its currents obey the moon. Its depths obey the pressure. Its life obeys gravity and light. But in the silent field, none of these laws apply. And perhaps it is because what lives there does not obey rules that we understand. It does not respond to frequency, touch, or curiosity. It does not need to reveal itself, because it has already done so with the silence that falls when we approach. And it waits, without sleeping, without hiding, simply resting in the only place in the world that we have not yet learned to look at. Under the silence, where everything returns, Part 17, the depths that have no end. There are places in the ocean where the bottom simply cannot be reached, where the depth readings continue long after having reached the known limits of the trench, where submersibles descend, expecting a gentle slope, and instead find a falling cliff, a void so vast that it swallows sonar pulses without echo. These are the depths that have no end, not because they have no bottom, but because the ocean does not want to stop, places where geology gives way to something else. Not space nor pressure, but absence. And within that absence, some believe that there is a truth that humanity has not been prepared to understand. The Kurd Trench, northeast of New Zealand, is one of those places. Officially, it extends to more than 10 kilometers deep. It is measurable, finite, and mapped. But in 2015, a joint expedition of several Pacific nations detected what was believed to be a narrow fissure along the western wall of the trench. When a probe was lowered to examine the site, it fell freely for 6 minutes before coming into contact with something solid. Based on the speed and time of fall, fissure extended an additional 24 kilometers below the recorded bottom of the trench. The readings were discarded. Equipment failure was blamed, and the images were still grainy, disoriented, but clear enough to show a moment of strange clarity. At the deepest point of the descent, the probe's light flickered and then briefly met another. A flash of movement, not mechanical, not reflected, a reflection of light where no surface existed. The ocean, for a second, looked back. The strangest thing, was what happened next. The probe, upon being recovered, contained no memory of the final descent. The last 10 minutes of images had been overwritten, not with static nor black, but with frames of pure white color. The overexposure was discarded. The damage from pressure was discarded. A frame, when digitally improved, showed what seemed to be small repeated dots, not pixels, but symbols arranged in concentric rings like fossilized braille. A linguist was called to analyze it, who later stated that the structure resembled a language, but not a human one. He called it topographic syntax, a language composed not of words, but shapes. Apparently, the ocean had responded by writing something. Even more disturbing are the accounts of divers who claim to hear the abyss, not only in the way sound travels underwater, but in their bones. A deep-sea saturation diver, working on a drilling vessel in the Gulf of Mexico, described a sensation during a solo repair operation. He was 300 feet deep, tethered, breathing slowly when he felt a pulse, not through the suit, but through himself. A pressure that was not a wave or current, but a message. He did not hear it. He remembered it as a phrase he had never learned, but always knew. You have gone far enough. The pit he was in was not especially deep. There was no seismic activity. And yet, when he surfaced, his heart continued to beat irregularly for days. A medical examination revealed no damage, but inside his eardrums were small symmetrical scars, not caused by pressure, but engraved, deliberate, as if something had marked him. And then there are the creatures that only appear near these infinite zones. Organisms that do not move or swim, but float with directionless movements, as if gravity did not affect them. One of these specimens was briefly captured by a robotic arm during a test mission in the Java Trench. It looked like a ribbon of blackened tissue rolled into loose spirals. It had no eyes or fins, but as it was rolled up, it began to unravel, not to disintegrate, but to fall apart. Its body stretched until it became translucent, then colorless, and finally invisible. Not because it left the frame, but because it no longer existed in a form that could be recorded. When it reached 5,000 m, all that remained was a shadow projected on the floor of the submarine, a form without substance. The scientists never published the images. Instead, they ended the dive and returned to port. In private, one of the lead researchers wrote in his diary, "We have been assuming that we are reaching the depths of the ocean. What if it's the other way around? What if it is the ocean that reaches to us? Because maybe these bottomless places are not empty. Maybe they're not even part of this planet as we define it. Perhaps they are intersections, zones where the rules of Earth fade, where something else begins. Something that does not measure time in years or geology in pressure, but waits in the weightless darkness for us to keep moving forward. Each probe, each sonar beep, each descent, an invitation that is not answered with a welcome, but with silence. And the more we go into these places, the more that silence intensifies. It becomes form, message, a border. It is not just the end of pressure or light, but the beginning of something completely different, a threshold. After all, the ocean is not uniform. It is sown with wounds older than memory, trenches that divide continents, cracks that have never closed, mouths that have never closed. And beneath them, perhaps the depth itself is alive. It is not a creature or God, just a force, one that does not think, desire, or rage. It just waits, and when we arrive too far, it does not respond with anger. It simply opens. Part 18. Creatures that should not move in deep sea. The movement is a luxury. The light is scarce. The energy, even more so. And evolution has perfected their residence, turning them into masters of stillness. Most of the creatures of the sea depths move slowly or pulse, conserving the energy of their bodies with each moment of inertia. But in the farthest confines, near the walls of the pits, near the fields of black smokers, in the disturbing zones where not even the sonar dares to echo, things have been sighted that move with a deliberate precision. Creatures that should not move, not because they are injured or dead, but because they seem never to have been alive. They are not animals that swim or slide. They adapt. Their movement is mechanical in rhythm, but organic in form. They do not react to light, currents, or bait. They simply exist until they decide to do something else. In 2014, a depth scanner exploring the western edge of the Mariana Trench detected an anomaly. At first, the crew assumed it was an optical illusion, just a column of sediments rising from a small collapse along the trench wall, but the column maintained a perfectly vertical shape, rotating slowly. It was semi-transparent, about 4 m high, and narrowed at both ends like an hourglass of smoke. As the ROV approached, the object turned again and moved laterally without turning, moving through the current against pressure gradients and without any visible form of propulsion. The object passed under the ROV lights for 5 seconds. All the electronic sensors on board dimmed. The video transmission did not darken, but the brightness decreased in a perfectly symmetrical curve, as if light was absorbed evenly. And in that twilight, something became visible inside the creature. A twisted, faint, and changing geometry, like the outline of vertebrae that did not connect. Shapes that rotated without pivoting. Segments that did not fit. A skeletal shape, but incorrect. Not built to support muscles or protect organs. Built for something else, to serve as a structure, as a container. The team ended the immersion immediately. Upon recovering the equipment, all the LEDs of the lighting system had melted, not from heat, but from cold. The lights had frozen internally, leaving frost behind the lenses. The outer casing suffered no damage. The creature was never seen again. A similar event took place off the coast of Antarctica. During a research mission in late winter to study the currents under the ice, several members of the team reported seeing a moving shadow in the snow. A phrase that perplexed the analysts until the video from a helmet camera was examined. The images revealed a shape under the divers that swam slowly between 2 layers of sleet and brine. It looked like a manta ray, but moved like no known species. Its wings rippled vertically, not horizontally. Its outline shone as if it were not completely in phase with the water. The creature seemed to exist in flashes, sometimes transparent, sometimes defined. What most disturbed the team was not the shape or size. It was the silence. The creature did not emit any sound, not even the subharmonic vibrations that normally accompany underwater life. It was like watching a silent video, but from inside the scene. The divers later described the sensation of being in someone else's dream. Some even said they felt emotions that were not their own: pain, confusion, containment. As if the creature was projecting thoughts, not to communicate, but to filter its presence through something we could understand. There is a hypothesis that oceanographers and fringe theorists quietly share, that some deep-sea organisms may not come from a continuous line of terrestrial evolution, but arise from conditions so isolated and strange that they develop in autonomous pockets, sealed evolutionary chambers that operate with different rules than ours. Creatures born not from competition, but from pressure, temperature, and chemical logic. Born not to survive, but to stabilize their environment. And when the environment changes, when something strange enters it, like us, they respond with their presence. They do not attack, they do not retreat, they only move. Of the kind that says, "This space is not yours." In a Puerto Rico trench, a creature known only as the spiral has been reported on many occasions. Each sighting is slightly different, but they always share one detail: a spiral shape that rotates with impossible geometry. It has been described as a snake, as a tendril, even as a rope twisting in zero gravity. But the most disturbing descriptions come from the crew of submersibles who have passed within 100 meters of the anomaly. They describe a sensation of being dragged, not physically, but mentally, as if the creature entered their thoughts and slowly turned them. One pilot reported thinking about his home, about his childhood, about memories that did not seem his own. Another reported hearing a sound that was not sound, a scratch in his thoughts, like something trying to be remembered. The subsystems did not report any gravitational anomaly, nor any magnetic disturbance. Yet one of the navigation gyroscopes rotated on itself for 13 minutes. The pilot remembered nothing of it. These creatures, if they can be called that, may not think. They may not eat, reproduce, or perceive time as we do, but they move. And that movement is intentional, as if they kept something in balance, as if their existence was based not on life, but on containment. Not of themselves, but of something else, something deeper. Because there are areas in the ocean where these movements concentrate. Places where nothing else lives, where the currents spin endlessly, where the light deviates slightly from the axis, where all machines sent to explore return with a new scar, scratched metal, melted cables, camera images that skip seconds like a missed heartbeat. And always at the bottom of these anomalies. Movement, not violent, not erratic, just movement that should not be there. Deliberate, patient, present creatures that should not move but do. Part 19. The black bloom in the deepest layers of the ocean, beyond where sunlight dares reach. Life tends to move slowly, if it moves at all. There is a stillness in those waters, born of cold, weight, and eternity. It is a silence so absolute that even bacteria slow their replication cycles, and where the brightest spark of light is a flash of bioluminescence lost in darkness. But not all movement in the abyss is gradual. Not all growth is organic as we understand it, because sometimes something down there blooms without petals and purpose. In 2009, a team of researchers deploying sediment sensors along the Tonga Trench recorded a strange biological peak. It started with the usual, a small increase in microbial activity in line with nearby vent fields. But then the numbers skyrocketed. The cell count multiplied exponentially, not in weeks or days, but in hours. Something invisible was growing, filling the water column at depths close to 10,000 m. However, nothing visible appeared in the ROV camera images. No clouds, no particles, no swarms of plankton or algae until it moved. One of the sensory units, barely the size of a shoebox, sent an emergency signal. It was being displaced, not pulled or dropped, but transported. When the transmission switched to the onboard camera, the screen showed an undulating field of darkness. It was not a shadow, nor the absence of light, but a fibrous blackness with texture that adhered to itself like a fluid organism. It had no defined edges, only density, like a cloud of ash underwater, but dense enough to push against metal. The team called it black flower. It was not a creature. They said it was not a colony or swarm. It was a condition, a phase that the water had entered, or perhaps a form that it had been taught to adopt. When the flower passed, all the nearby life, the little that there was, had disappeared. The crustaceans, the anemones, even the microbial layers that covered the bottom of the trench, had disappeared, not consumed, erased, as if life had never taken root there. For the following weeks, that section of the trench showed no signs of regeneration or recolonization or return of bacteria, not even under stimulated laboratory conditions. The environment had become inert, not dead, but inhospitable, as if the water had rewritten its code and refused to be biology again. Years later, similar events would be recorded in the South Sandwich Trench and again off the coast of the Kuril Islands. In all cases, the flowering manifested in the same way. First, a spike in microbial noise, then inexplicable movement of local instruments, and then the complete biological erasure of the area. But a place in the depths of Thunder Trench offered something different. The ROV deployed there captured the flowering from above. Instead of a slow drift, it emerged like a flower sprouting from mud. A spiral pulse of black, formed by concentric bands, each ring moving in the opposite direction to the previous one. And in the center, for a brief instant, a hole appeared, but it was not a void, but a shape, a hexagon with sharp edges, like a geometric figure embedded in the water. It only lasted a few seconds before collapsing inward, but a frame was preserved. It showed the shape flickering with dozens of small lights, not shining, but flickering. A pattern, recorded and reproduced frame by frame, revealed time intervals, not regular, nor rhythmic, but encoded. The research team subjected the sequence to spectrographic analysis and obtained a chilling result. The flickers coincided with acoustic waves, specifically waves that imitated the distress calls of whales, accelerated and superimposed with cries of human babies. When the audio was converted and reproduced at deep-sea pressure frequencies, the resulting tone caused headaches, nausea, and, above all, a feeling of descent, as if the listener were falling even while sitting. What emerged from that experiment was never published. One of the engineers, who reportedly could not sleep for days afterwards, wrote a single sentence in a notebook that was found near the door of the sound laboratory. It is not trying to be seen. It is trying to be remembered. As far as we know, the black balloon does not remain in one place. It appears in isolation in the deepest points of the world, and only briefly, but its aftermath is always same. Sterilization, the elimination of presence as if it were undoing something, not consuming, but correcting. So what is it? Some say it is a defense mechanism, the way the ocean has of healing itself when the foreign presence becomes too great, a purge. Others believe it is a vestige, something older than cells or DNA, a form of memory encoded in pressure and temperature, a structure that is not alive, but awakens momentarily when the conditions coincide with some forgotten trigger. However, the most disturbing theory is that the bloom is not from the ocean at all, that it does not descend from above, but from below, even the deepest trenches, from an unmapped place, untouched, not because we have not reached it, but because it is not meant to be. The ocean may be deep, but perhaps it rests on the surface of something even deeper, something to which the bloom returns, something to which it belongs. What if the bloom is a messenger? What if it is a warning? Not for us, but for everything else, for the bacteria, the fish, the eels, the ancient coral trees. A message that says, leave. This is no longer yours. What if one day it does not go back? What if it stays? What if it blooms completely? Not in a single trench, but in all of them, at the same time, silent, black, erasing the little life that the abyss still allows. Not with anger, nor with hunger, but with determination. Because the sea, despite its silence, has memory, and memory, when threatened, defends itself. Part 20. The Room Under the Ocean. There are legends among deep-sea crews. Silent legends. Whispers transmitted between divers and submersible pilots. When the surface deviates a little from the GPS, the depth gauges flash once, then stabilize, and then comes silence. An unnatural silence, in which even the sound of the vessel seems muffled. Both divers and pilots describe it as the moment when the sea stops responding, as if everything familiar, the currents, the pressure, the bioluminescent dispersion, simply ceased, and then they see it. It does not always look the same. Sometimes it is a perfect cube of smooth stone nestled in the trench wall. Other times it appears as a huge circle, like a tunnel or dome. Once it was described as a staircase that descended the wall of the pit, with each step incredibly flat and without erosion, covered in sediment that slipped like crystal dust. But regardless of form, the description ends with the same word, room, because it is not of the ocean. It is inside the ocean and should not belong there. In one of the first recorded versions of the story, a Soviet bathyscaphe that in the 1960s was carrying out Cold War sonar tests off the coast of Kamchatka detected a cavity under the pit that showed no seismic signs. The submarine went down to investigate. The pilot reported that he had seen a high, narrow opening illuminated from the inside. No light from the submarine could reach so far. And yet, something shone brightly. It was not bright or welcoming, but constant. He did not go in. He remained suspended for a moment, observing. Then the transmission cut out. The bathyscaphe returned safely to the surface 30 minutes later, but the pilot refused to speak about what happened. The tapes were then archived. Years later, a maintenance worker transferring data found them. There were no images, only audio recordings. A single phrase whispered in Russian only. They look back then. What makes this myth persist is not only the variety of people who tell it, scientists, engineers, even high-pressure welders, but how they all describe the same sensation. Not everyone feels fear, but something strange happens. As if the ocean itself did not approve at all. As if they had seen something sacred, not in a divine sense, but in the sense in which ancient places feel sacred. Sealed, buried, deliberately forgotten. The room was not built for us. Its angles are all incorrect. Its proportions seem stretched in a way that deceives the eye itself. Some report a pressure increasing the more you look. Not a physical pressure, but an emotional one, like shame or guilt for interrupting something ancient there. And yet, some do enter. In 2016, a Brazilian mining drone deviated from its course during a stability test next to a ditch. Its last signal showed a slow and steady descent through a fissure never before mapped. For 27 minutes, it transmitted images of what appeared to be a sloping tunnel instead. Smooth walls, without any marine growth. At the bottom, a square chamber appeared. In the center of the chamber, nothing but the floor. But the drone's light revealed carved marks upon the floor. They were not letters, nor anything that a force, natural or otherwise, could create a room under the sea, smooth and symmetrical, without pressure or time having touched it. Some believe it is a vestige of a lost civilization before records existed, before the Ice Age, even before the continental masses formed. Others suggest that it is not a ruin, but a functional structure intended not to house life, but to anchor something, a stabilizer, a container, a lock. And if that is true, the question becomes obvious. What was so dangerous that the ocean built a room around it all? Even more disturbing are its psychological effects. People who claim to have witnessed it, even briefly, report symptoms weeks or months later, such as detachment, loss of time, a feeling that the sky is thinner than before now. Several describe the same dream in which they descend through an endless tunnel with walls of undulating water, and at the bottom, instead of floor, an eye. Not literal, just the idea of an immense and open one that observes, not with curiosity, but with recognition. There is a theory that is whispered in very few that the room is not made of stone, but of the pressure itself, folded, compacted, molded into something permanent by forces that we do not understand and that are not part of the fabric of the ocean. And like all knots, it functions to prevent something from unraveling. We have mapped the bottom of the ocean. We build machines to explore, measure, and discover. But we never ask ourselves what the sea hides because it loves hiding. We never consider that perhaps the sea is also hiding from something else. That maybe the pits were not sculpted by tectonics, but deepened deliberately, molded to contain. And when the silence becomes too deep, when the current falls and the light fades and all the sounds disappear, except for the beating of your heart, maybe that is how the sea warns you not to turn around. Not because it is dangerous, but because what is ahead reminds you and has not forgotten the last time someone like you found that room. Part 21. The drifters. There are currents in the ocean that no satellite can track. They do not follow the tides, nor the wind, nor the lunar pole. They do not obey temperature gradients or salinity changes. They are invisible to instruments, but their effects are unmistakable. They drag things, not violently, but deliberately. Slow arcs across the ocean floor, mud swirling in spirals. Abandoned equipment displaced meters beyond where it was abandoned, with no trace of currents. There are the currents, and within them, some say that something observes. The term current watchers began as a joke in old naval circles, stories of shadows that followed diving teams without a trace. Shapes sighted just outside the light beam of a submersible. But over time, the reports accumulated and their consistency became hard to ignore. In almost all cases, the events take place at more than 5,000 m deep, where darkness is not a lack of light, but a quality, a presence, a texture that can be felt inside the suit, on the skin, behind the eyes. It begins with disorientation. Crew members report the sensation of being followed, even when they are alone inside sealed vessels. The navigation software begins to slow down. It does not freeze or fail, it just hesitates. As if they hesitated, the cameras record well, but when playing the images, anomalies are observed. Flickers, failures in the geometry, a shape that does not exist in 3 dimensions, captured only in a frame before disappearing. Long, thin, curved like a tendril or a thorn, always watching from the same angle, behind and above. In 2011, a Japanese scientific expedition near the Kamchatka Coral Trench deployed a deep-anchored research platform designed to remain submerged for 72 hours. It had no propulsion, just a fixed body with rotating cameras and environmental sensors. After 2 days of normal readings, the cameras began to rotate on their own, not randomly, but slowly toward a fixed point behind the platform. The rotation motors were not activated. There was no current to explain the movement. And the most chilling thing is that the platform had no integrated artificial intelligence system to detect movements, but the cameras moved as if they were following something. The captured images showed a faint glow in the distance, which pulsed irregularly, organically, but without a source. A shape began to emerge from the haze. A long vertical line that flickered like a shadow behind glass, then another parallel one, and then a horizontal line above both. For 7 minutes, the platform's lights dimmed slightly, exactly 11%. And in that dimness, the lines seemed to curve, becoming a figure, a face, neither human nor animal, with a hint of symmetry. Not enough to define it, just enough to disturb. The platform was recovered ahead of schedule. The research team never published the visual files, but fragments were later leaked, enough to provoke discussions in marine biology forums, secret groups about the deep sea, and even among theorists of secret military projects. Some believed it was a rare, bioluminescent, deep-sea predator. Others claimed it was a false image caused by the overlapping particle layers. But an oceanographer, when reviewing the images in private, wrote something simple below his analysis. It fixed first on the camera. This coincides with a recurring theme in multiple expeditions. Whatever the drifters are, they are not passive. They only appear when deep-sea machines are in their moment of greatest stillness. When the propulsion systems are turned off, when humans are not looking for anything, they do not approach. They show themselves briefly, as a test, as curiosity, or a warning. Some immersion records describe observers appearing in pairs, like specular stripes on opposite sides of a vessel, always equidistant. Others describe a singular shape that keeps pace with a submersible without making contact. In 2018, a rudimentary dive near the attack trench reported strange reflections on its outer glass at 7,000 m. The pilot swore he saw a second cabin on the outside, an impossible image which imitated his vessel, but in reverse, empty, and yet floated in the air, reflecting every movement a second before he did. Another pilot later described hearing something through the helmet. It was not a sonar, nor the noise of the equipment, nor breathing, but it was not human, nor superficial nor deep. It was only present, like some lungs without a body, synchronized with theirs. Were these observers, then? Some theorize they are life forms that evolved completely in the void, sensitive to movement but not sound, creatures that do not swim, but follow, that see us not with sight, but anticipation. They move in stillness, along paths that we cannot perceive. They are not hunters or prey, only sentinels of an environment we never should have touched. Others go further and suggest that they are not life forms, but reflections of another reality. Shadows projected through a multidimensional fold. Evidence that the depths of the ocean intersect with places that physics has not yet reached, where space undulates like a fabric and time repeats silently, unnoticed by those who pass through it too quickly. Perhaps the most disturbing theory is this one. The observers are nothing new. They're not rare at all. They're always present. We are simply not still enough to see them now. They wait in silence, not because they fear us, but because they remember what we are now. We are movement itself. We are pure noise. We descend with lights, thrusters, and metallic limbs that grab, take samples, and drag. But when we finally stop, when systems halt and batteries turn off, they approach and observe, not with malice, but understanding. Because in their world, stillness means everything. Is how they live, think, and see. And when we finally learn to be silent, That is when they know we are there and observe us. Part 22. The hunger at 11,000 m deep. All living beings that we know, all plants, animals, and microbes, need energy, whether from sunlight, from chemical reactions, or from the consumption of other living beings. All existence is subject to a basic law: feed or simply disappear. In the upper layers of the ocean, that law feels familiar. Fish eat smaller fish always. Coral absorbs nutrients from drifting plankton now. Even bioluminescent creatures that shine like stars survive thanks to traces of chemical substances and a slow metabolism rate. But in the deepest areas, at 11,000 m and further down, there's almost nothing for food. Nothing ever moves. Nothing ever grows. And yet, sometimes something still feeds. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, there is a depression within another, known unofficially as Punto Omega by the few scientists who have tried to map it. It is not officially recognized because it defies all classification. The pressure there is more than crushing and lethal. It bends metal as if paper breaks reinforced glass and slows electronic signals until they flicker behind real time. The sediment is so compact that it behaves almost like flesh undulating under pressure, resisting penetration. In a word, it's abnormal. And yet, in 2020, a remote, deep exploration vehicle designed by a private German institute managed to reach this space. The mission was quite simple. Take core samples at the trench's lowest point. Record any anomalies, then ascend. Instead, what it found was clear evidence of digestion. Not fossilized bones or dissolved materials at all. Not the slow deconstruction of time and pressure, but bite marks, clean, symmetrical, spaced like teeth. They were found on the tracker's metal itself 37 minutes after it reached the seabed. The slits were too deep to be pressure deformations and too smooth to be collision damage. There were no currents strong enough to move anything toward the tracker at that depth. Nothing that could have caused such uniformity. And yet, the marks were there, parallel lines forming a perfect arc, wrapping the machine's casing like a mouth pressed against it intentionally. When they were later analyzed, it was calculated that the pressure needed to make those marks was 25 times the bite force of a great white shark's. However, there were no cracks or cuts, just a footprint, as if something tasted it. What kind of organism could have done that? No living being on Earth should survive at that depth, much less move, hunt, or bite. But when the tracker was recovered and disassembled, the researchers discovered something else. A film, not a fluid, nor even a growth. A thin, mucus-like substance coated the lower edge of the machine, dense in protein chains that did not correspond to any known life form. Even more disturbing, the proteins were incomplete. They were partially formed, as if something had begun to synthesize digestion, but had stopped, as if what came into contact expected to find meat, not metal. But the most disturbing discovery came from the onboard cameras. During its descent to about 10,860 m, the transmission was briefly interrupted. One frame, just one, was corrupted completely. It showed nothing but darkness, no sediment, no movement, no static, just absolute black. But in the audio channel a hum was heard. It was not a voice, nor a machine, just a tone, low and constant, like an alarm siren buried under kilometers of water. It did not match any geological vibration or any known frequency, but when subjected to spectrographic analysis, it revealed a clear pattern. The waveform was complex, with layers, as if multiple voices or forces were speaking simultaneously in a language of vibrations. A sound analyst described it as the oral equivalent of looking into an eye that does not blink. What kind of life can exist at such depth? And more urgently, what kind of life wants to exist there? There are some theories. One of the most prominent suggests that at these depths, evolution no longer favors the physical form. It favors behavior alone. Creatures do not develop muscles or speed anymore. They develop strategies, deceptions, decoys, the ability to hide their presence in a way so complete that not even sonar can detect them. And in doing so, they develop the only trait that had never before been necessary in the ocean: patience. If something exists at 11,000 m, it does not chase prey. It does not ambush anything. It waits for hours, days, perhaps centuries, until something strange enters its world. Something warm, something slow, something potentially edible. Some scientists have quietly speculated that these deep entities are not even totally physical as we understand them, that the pressure, darkness, and chemical saturation at such depths allow forms of existence more like fields than bodies. Fields that can feel, taste, and even feed. By enveloping their prey and breaking down their presence until only information, memory, a footprint remains that they do not chew, tear, or swallow, but erase. Because feeding in the abyss may not mean nourishing just the body. It may mean absorbing identity itself, stripping of being, a slow and silent consumption of what something was until it becomes part of the darkness. This would explain the reports of the divers who report time losses near the walls of the pits, the equipment that returns without any data, the dreams of floating in cold water, not swimming, but drifting towards something vast, only to wake up with tears in their eyes and no memory. Why indeed? As if a part of them had been sampled, not completely, but just enough. So maybe the bottom of the ocean is not simply a physical place. Perhaps it is a kind of threshold, a digestive tract that does not belong to a creature, but to the sea itself. And perhaps that is why the pits are shaped like open wounds, long and yawning in the earth, lined with silence and full of waiting. And perhaps, just perhaps, hunger is the oldest thing that exists in the sea. Older than fish, older than light, older than the sound of waves breaking on the shore, and still waiting there at 11,000 m. Part 23. The station that disappeared in the early 1990s, before the widespread use of satellite repeaters and before real-time ocean telemetry became the norm, deep-sea research relied heavily on semi-permanent underwater stations. These stations were built to withstand the pressures of the abyss, allowing instruments to remain thousands of meters below the surface for months, even years. Most of these units functioned predictably, collecting data, recording currents, measuring seismic activity, and occasionally filming anything that crossed their lenses. But its sensors were state-of-the-art, redundant, resistant, and accurate for the time. It submerged into the trench and, upon arrival, established contact to the surface. Over the next 48 hours, it sent clean telemetry of pressure, temperature, and chemical composition. Then it went silent. There were no alarms or crash logs, no evidence of damage or failure, just nothing. Assuming a transmission failure, the team prepared for its recovery. The station, equipped with an automatic ascent system activated by command, did not rise. A manual acoustic release was initiated. There was no response. 3 days later, a second dive was made with a rescue submarine nearby to investigate. What they found was a void. The exact coordinates of the Echo 7 landing zone only showed a dusty footprint in the mud. There were no remains, no debris, not even scratches on the trench wall. It had not been crushed or buried. It had simply disappeared. At first, the incident was classified a recovery failure. Perhaps the release mechanism had jammed, or the beacon had failed. But what baffled the team most were the last 4 seconds of transmitted data. Just before going dark, the station's sonar recorded one echo. It was not an animal or rock, but a perfect return signal, like a mirror. Something down there had sent the signal. Identical, unaltered, unblurred, as if something below the station had become reflective, not in light, but in presence. Years later, an informant from one of the participating agencies leaked some internal correspondence. The emails mentioned something more than just a technical failure. The divers on the recovery mission had reported a sensation as they approached the trench bottom. A weight behind the eyes, dissonance in their thoughts. One pilot noted in his diary, "The water down here is not thick. It is dense with memories, as if something that once forgot you is watching and does not want to make that mistake again." Another strange detail emerged from the archived sonar records. 2 hours before Echo 7 disappeared, a slight vibration had been detected from the seabed. It was not a horizontal or tectonic movement, but a vertical tremor, as if something was rising under the trench. It was not an earthquake, but a pulse. It repeated 4 times and then ceased. The interval between pulses increased exponentially, and then there was silence. There's a theory that is rarely mentioned aloud, not even in private research circles, according to which the deepest trenches are not entirely natural, either in their shape or in their behavior. That some of them are hollow in ways that we cannot detect. They're not caves or caverns, but structures so large and so submerged in geological time that they defy our recognition. That what we consider the seabed may be little more than the roof of something else. And occasionally, when the pressure changes or human interference triggers an erroneous sequence of vibrations, the ocean does not react. It responds. The Echo 7 was never found, not a single fragment. And yet 4 years later, a different research probe operating 800 kilometers away, near the Mariana Trench, captured something unexpected. A metallic object was drifting in front of its camera. It was smooth, with an alphanumeric code engraved by corrosion. It was later confirmed to match. It was a panel from the Echo 7 casing, but the chemical signature did not match seawater corrosion patterns. It had been exposed to temperatures and pressures higher than those known on Earth, and was partially magnetized, something impossible given its original non-magnetic composition. The ocean does not easily lose things. The remains are scattered, corpses rise or sink. The sediments swallow what they can. But erasing a titanium station, eliminating all trace, and returning only a fragment marked by scars years later. That is not chance. That is not current. That is intentional. Some believe that Echo 7 descended to something deeper than the trench, not falling, but dragged into a fold or crack invisible to us. A chamber under the Earth's crust that beats every few years, opening just long enough to feed on observation. Not with malice, but with curiosity to study what dared to descend and, once finished, return only a piece, as if saying, "We saw you too." And if that is true, then the ocean is not just a mass of water. It is a door, a thinking border between worlds, between pressure and presence, memory and matter. And sometimes, when we call too boldly, it opens just enough to remind us that we are not alone. And then it closes again. Part 24. Those who wait without moving. There's a type of fear situated below all the others, deeper than the predators, older than the darkness. It is the fear of something that simply waits, not because it lacks purpose, but because its patience is a weapon. In the vast and unknown cavities of the deep ocean, there are things that do not swim, hunt, or flee. They do not emit light or respond to stimuli. They are not dead, yet they do not live in any way that we can understand. They are present and wait without moving. In 2004, an oceanographic team operating in the Mozambique Channel deployed a benthic lander equipped with time-lapse cameras, pressure sensors, and a passive sonar to study abyssal sediment flows. The lander descended to more than 6,300 m, landed silently on the silt, and began its 72-hour observation cycle. During the first 26 hours, everything proceeded normally. Microbial drift, crustaceans that crawled slowly, the odd blind eel glimpsed at the edges of the frame. Then, in hour 27, the image changed. It did not move. It was not cut. It also remained still. The seabed, previously active with small movements, became like stone. Nothing entered or left the frame. No current was passing. The silt was not displaced. It was as if time had stopped, but only in that exact rectangle. Even the digital timestamp of the images continued to advance. The landing module continued to transmit, but the image did not change until hour 29. A shape appeared, without entering, without emerging, simply existing. It did not cast a shadow or displace any particles around it. It had no defined edge, just a distortion in the image, a presence that curved light like heat curves air. It remained for 8 full minutes. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, it disappeared. The analysis of the reproduction revealed something chilling. During those 8 minutes, the image did not freeze. It moved in fractions. Every 10 seconds, the distortion shifted 1 pixel, but only on one axis, as if it were turning to look at the camera, so slowly that the eye could not detect it. The researchers called it the observer frame, and it was not the only time they saw it. Other teams began reporting similar anomalies in oceans separated by years, always at extreme depths, always on fixed platforms. The descriptions varied in shape and clarity, but shared a common characteristic. There was no biological response. Nothing near the object reacted, neither fleeing nor attacking. They simply stopped, turned off, as if in a sign of reverence or fear. The predominant theory among the brave who dare to speculate is that these presences are not life forms at all, but echoes of pressure, manifestations of a deep time compressed into forms that our senses barely register. They do not move because they do not need to. They do not feed because they're not part of the same ecological chain. They exist on a different thread, in which waiting is not passive, but predatory. In 2012, a manned submersible descending through the Philippine Trench passed less than 30 meters from what the pilot initially mistook for a rock formation. Flat, vertical, perfectly symmetrical, like an obelisk planted at the bottom of the trench. The pilot turned on a side light panel to examine it. The moment the beam illuminated it, all the readings on his control panel went blank. The cameras were still working, but the telemetry had disappeared. The internal sensors stopped responding. Even his wristwatch stopped. It didn't slow down, it froze. When he surfaced 6 hours later, his watch started working again from the exact second it had stopped. When reviewing the images, the researchers noticed something subtle. When the light hit the formation, a pattern appeared on its surface. Circular rings engraved with small striations like fingerprints imprinted on the stone. The rings rotated counterclockwise only once and then disappeared. The pilot did not see them in real time, but when he was later asked to describe what he felt, he said, "As if something I had not yet known was reminding me." No one talks about these things in open conferences. They are anomalies in the data, sensor failures, optical illusions. That is what the reports say. But the people who return to the water, the divers, the pilots, the deep-sea crew, remember it. They speak with looks, with pauses. They omit certain coordinates. They whisper warnings that sound like folklore, but that sink too deep to be ignored. There is something at the bottom of the sea that does not chase, nor flee, nor even observe as we understand it. It remains fixed, not anchored by mass or force, but by meaning, a kind of sentinel built not to watch, but to witness, as if what it guarded was not a place, but a truth. And that truth may be this: we are not alone in the dark, not because other creatures swim beside us, but because something down there waits. It waited before us. It keeps waiting without sleeping, without waking up, simply existing until we realize. And then it also remembers us. Part 25. The Silent Network Under the Sea. In the study of the oceanic depths, one of the most difficult challenges to address is understanding communication, not ours. Ours is noisy and temporary. It depends on cables, sonars, and flashing lights. But the oceans, having their own systems, emit signals that move without current, that cross impossible distances without a clear medium. Frequencies that do not follow the known laws of sound. For decades, they have been dismissed as anomalies. But recently, a growing number of tests suggest something extraordinary, that the seabed could harbor a kind of network, not built, not mechanical, but ancient, organic, and very alive. It all started with low-frequency anomalies recorded in different trenches thousands of kilometers away. Sounds too consistent to be a coincidence, but too weak to be triangulated. The same pulse appeared near the Kurd Trench, off the coast of Japan, and again in the Puerto Rico Trench, all in a matter of hours. It was not an earthquake or biological noises. These signals were slower, deeper, a tone that moved like a heartbeat but not from an earth creature. A French oceanographic institute studying the movement of the plates was the first to detect the pattern. At first, they believed it was related to the activity of thermal vents, perhaps a geothermal resonance. But when the signal was recorded again 3 months later, at exactly the same time, the theory failed. Hydrothermal sources do not work with clocks, nor do seismic faults pulse at regular intervals. Something was transmitting. Subsequent analyses revealed another detail. The pulses varied slightly in frequency from one trench to another, like regional dialects, but maintained the same rhythm, and in the seconds between the pulses, barely perceptible changes in the ambient frequency were detected, like an interstitial noise, like a response. This discovery gave rise to a controversial hypothesis. What if the trenches were not just scars on the ocean floor? What if they were nodes, joining points in a kind of planetary network, natural structures designed not to store or channel energy, but to listen and respond? What if the deepest places on Earth were not just geological features, but elements of a distributed organism? A silent network built not from neurons, but from pressure, minerals, and time. It was then that the stories resurfaced. The divers who had worked near multiple trenches reported the same dreams weeks later. Dreams in which they saw themselves submerged in a large chamber, surrounded by pulsating walls, neither mechanical nor organic, just dark. In the dream, they did not float. They were suspended like data packets within a signal. Some described having heard voices, not in the form of language, but of sensations. A wordless message. You have been observed. In 2019, a government-funded underwater drone sent to the South Sandwich Trench returned with data showing fluctuations in water density impossible according to known physics. At intervals that coincided with the mysterious pulse, the water briefly thickened, as if it had been impregnated with something denser than matter, but with no measurable changes in mass. The drone's lights dimmed during these phenomena, although the battery continued to function normally. A later review revealed that, during each pulse, its internal clock slowed by a few milliseconds and then recovered. Time itself was curving. At first, it was assumed that this was a peculiarity of gravimetric distortion near tectonic boundaries. But similar distortions were soon observed in trenches without tectonic activity. It was then that the network theory gained traction in the most discrete circles of geophysics. What if these signals were not environmental at all? What if they were sensory output? A team from Norway attempted a specific response, transmitting a synthetic imitation of the pulse sequence from the bottom of the Malloy Deep. The signal was sent every 3 minutes for 2 hours. Nothing happened. Then, exactly 47 minutes after the last transmission, the ocean responded. The return signal did not match the original. It was faster, shorter, compressed, a dense burst of sound lasting exactly 0.83 seconds. But in that small burst, more than 4,000 layers of unique frequencies were encoded. Too many for any known marine organism to produce. Too orderly to be geological. When the signal was slowed down and processed by a spectrogram, it formed figures, patterns that looked like writing, not letters or numbers, but nested spirals, intertwined curves, recursive loops. More art than language, more function than form. The data was reviewed and classified. What was perhaps most disturbing was what came next. All sensors within a 100 kilometers radius began to fail one by one. Not immediately or violently. They simply stopped working. The systems were intact. The batteries full. There was no data, just silence. As if they had been disconnected from reality itself. 2 weeks later, a fishing boat recorded sonar readings of a structure that had not existed before. A vertical column rising 300 m above the seabed. Perfectly smooth, untouched by current or marine life. It pulsed once and then disappeared. A week later, another appeared in another ocean. If the ocean is a network, then it's not passive. It is not just transporting signals. It responds. It transforms. It decides. This would explain why deep exploration becomes increasingly unreliable at certain depths. Why the images get cut. Why the drones lose course. Why submarines record pressure data that does not make sense. The ocean may not want measuring. Not because it resists intrusion, but because it is already measuring. And we are not observers. We're the subjects. And the network observes from trench to trench, from darkness to the deepest. Listen, remember, And when we speak, when we hit its walls and focus our lights and buzz with our machines, we do not probe the silence. We are interrupting a conversation that has occurred for millions of years. And sometimes the ocean decides to respond. Part 26. The Sleepers Beneath the Fault. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a scar dividing the ocean floor from the Arctic to Africa's southern tip. It is not a place, but a fracture in the crust, extending through the continents. It breathes heat and pressure through magma fissures and hydrothermal vents. It is a fault born of violence, of tectonic plates that shift, crack, and rub over millennia. But somewhere in this colossal scenario, there is a depth still unmapped, a gap too symmetrical to ignore, and a silence too deliberate to be natural. From there come stories of the sleepers. Unlike the trenches, which sink like daggers into earth, the rift descends with a strange grace. A gently sloping funnel carved with spiraling walls. Submersibles that pass nearby report anomalies. Slight magnetic interference. Inexplicable compass deviations. And more curiously, a decrease in environmental biological activity. There are no fish, no plankton, not even bacteria in its silt. The ocean here is not empty. It is retained. In 2016, a British-American expedition with the aim of studying volcanic gas exchange deployed an autonomous underwater vehicle, EUV, equipped with a ground penetration sonar and high-fidelity magnetometers. The plan was simple. Map the rift, mark the hot spots, and return. But halfway through the mission, the AUV began to transmit corrupt data. They were not blank, just wrong. The coordinates were reversed. Pressure readings fluctuated erratically. Then the sonar map came. The image looked like lines of oblong masses buried just below the seabed, each about 20 m long. There were 17, equidistant, aligned to the curvature of the rift. The AUV computer marked them as subrock formations, probably basalt, but a technician noticed something. They were not solid. Each showed a faint indication of a hollow center protected by a dense outer layer. And when the vehicle passed over them, a low-frequency pulse was recorded, not from the AUV itself, but from the ridge. A pressure wave, just one, too deep to hear and too perfect to ignore. It was then that the term sleepers was created, not as a joke, but as a warning because a second pass over the anomaly yielded some new data. One of the masses had moved only a few degrees, just an inclination, as if it was adjusting. No seismic activity had been recorded. No current strong enough to move something so heavy. But the sonar was clear. The object was no longer aligned with the others, and its hollow center's temperature had changed by 23 degrees Celsius. Something had moved inside it. The AUV was immediately removed from emission. The official reason was hardware instability, but internal emails describing a different reason were later leaked. The previously recorded pulse had a pattern, a recursive frequency that matched heart rhythms, not human, but biological, amplified and prolonged. It sounded like a slow, deep, continuous, and terrifyingly patient thunder. It was not a signal. It was a breath. Speculations broke out. What could lie buried beneath one of the most geologically volatile regions on the planet, resting in an unnatural formation, protected from time by the pressure and heat of the mantle itself? Some theorized that they were ancient life forms, creatures from an era when Earth was still forming, wrapped in shells created by themselves to withstand the cooling of the world. Others believed that they were not native to Earth, but were vessels created or forged, sewn in the fault, not by chance, but as part of a design, a message, a warning, a contingency. A fringe theory suggested that the sleepers were not sleeping at all. They were listening, hibernating in a state of total metabolic suspension, not for survival, but for synchronization, waiting for something to return or for something else to stop. Perhaps the human presence or the geological conditions, or perhaps waiting for a signal. However, what scared the researchers most was a discovery made months after the finding. When someone superimposed the coordinates of the formation on old maritime maps, they found something disturbing. The site matched a location marked in the records of 15th century sailors with a symbol that was no longer understood. a glyph that was found again on Babylonian clay tablets, and again in engravings near Lake Bowl. Always with the same design. A spiral wrapped around a vertical line, labeled only as still below. Independent divers who have approached the coordinates report disturbing experiences. A sudden pressure in the chest, a sharp drop in temperature, and a buzzing not in the water, but in the body. One diver described it as hearing with the bones. Another claimed to have seen shadows under the seabed, moving without moving, like silhouettes behind frosted glass. One returned from a dive ahead of time, wide-eyed and trembling, repeating a single phrase, "I didn't see it, but it saw me." And then there's the last anomaly. During one of the last sonar passes before the site was abandoned, the team recorded a spike in seismic resonance. It was not an earthquake, but a resonance. All the sensors in the trench within a 500 kilometers radius recorded it. It lasted 11 seconds and ended with a shape, a pattern traced by pressure waves that, when visualized, formed a circle, perfect, impossibly precise, a limit. When mapping it, the sleepers were inside its edge. Inside, contained. And that is the most terrifying theory of all. Not that the sleepers are trapped, but that they are kept apart. Not by chance, nor by nature, but by design. Something sleeps down there. Something buried. Something alive enough to move in its rest and pulse once every few years with a pressure that changes the water itself. Something that may not be dreaming at all, just waiting. Part 27. The ship that should not float. In 2003, a cargo ship, the Allura Gray, was sighted adrift in the South Pacific, hundreds of kilometers from any known maritime route. The ship had no active transponder. No distress signals were sent. The hull was rusty, but intact, and the deck, seen from afar, seemed intact. It was found by a weather surveillance drone from Nueva Zelanda, adrift and motionless in one of the calmest and deepest areas of the Pacific. When authorities arrived days later hoping to recover the wreckage or an abandoned ship, they found something completely different. There was no crew, no signs of panic, fire, or flooding. The cargo manifest was missing. The navigation logs were erased. But the most disturbing detail was the ship's draft, the depth to which it sat in the water. Despite looking like a fully loaded freighter, the Allura Gray floated almost 2 meters higher than it should have, as if its entire hold was empty or full of something that did not weigh what it should. The inspectors went aboard. The bridge was clean. The electrical systems did not work. There was no auxiliary power. Below deck, the lights were off, but the emergency systems had flickered enough to leave slight burns on the wiring. At first, nothing unusual was found, but the lower hold, located below the engine deck, revealed a different story. The walls were deformed, not crushed or burst, but deformed, leaning inward in symmetrical patterns, arches that curved towards a central point on the floor. In the center, there was a round depression about 2 meters wide, burned and blackened. There was no other heat damage. There were no signs of fire. Only this singular point, as if something had pulsed outward, deforming the metal and then disappearing. The instruments sent down to analyze the distortion began failing. The compasses spun. The temperature sensors gave null values. Radio contact was lost inside the room. The crew members who entered reported a sensation of pressure, not physical, but cognitive, as if thoughts slowed and time stood still. A technician left the space pale, whispering, "It's deeper than it seems." A more detailed analysis revealed that the Allura Gray had not appeared in any maritime database for over 30 years. It had disappeared in 1972 when it was heading from Singapore to Chile with a full cargo of industrial components for drilling and 26 crew members on board. The ship had been given up as lost due to piracy or a storm. And yet, there it was, 3 decades later, floating in calm waters without a single trace of deterioration indicating the passage of time. There were only barnacles attached to the lowest waterline. The paint was faded, but not eroded. The anchor chains were not rusted. Even the emergency rations in the kitchen were edible. And yet, the crew had disappeared. They had not been lost. They simply were not there. Their cabins seemed unused. The bunks were made, the closets empty. No personal items remained. It was as if the ship had been emptied, but not by human hands. But that was not the strangest thing. In the deepest part of the ship, inside the strange, scorched depression, a hatch welded from the outside was found, a recent weld, still slightly worn. When they discovered it, they cut it open. Below, there was a vertical well, made of steel and covered in condensation. There were no ladders or steps, just a smooth descent with damp walls. Cameras were lowered inside. They recorded 37 m of clean descent. Then, at the bottom, water, still water, perfectly flat, completely black. A diver was sent, tied with oxygen equipment and thermal sensors. His descent was slow and controlled. At 10 m below the well's opening, he stopped moving. There were no signs of distress or struggle. He simply stopped. When they pulled him out, he was alive but mute. He stared at the ceiling for hours, pupils completely dilated, and finally murmured a phrase. "The oceans have collapsed. It is over." He was never allowed to dive again. A subsequent analysis of the water from the bottom of the well revealed that it did not match the samples from the surrounding ocean. The salinity, pressure, and thermal gradient were reversed, as if the water had been collected from somewhere deeper than any known trench, possibly beneath the oceanic crust. Its molecular behavior showed signs of unknown isotopes. Slightly radioactive, slightly magnetic, unnatural, non-terrestrial. The ship was towed back to port for study, but 2 nights before arrival, the vessel disappeared, towed by barges tracked by satellite and escorted by. During the last stage, a storm broke. Visibility was reduced for 30 minutes. When the storm subsided, the ship disappeared. The chains had broken cleanly. There were no remains, only a section of ocean now devoid of marine life for more than 20 kilometers around. Not a fish, not a jellyfish, not even plankton. Today, the Allura Gray is spoken of in hushed tones in deep-sea forums and among salvage teams patrolling the Pacific. Some believe it was never a ship, but a transport system carrying something through time or between points not meant to intersect. Others say it was a ship recovered from somewhere it should never have gone, that it returned not because they found it, but because they let it go as proof, as a warning. The idea that a ship can disappear and return decades later is disturbing enough. But the idea that it returned carrying a door to another place, deeper, beyond, is a story that keeps even the most experienced sailors awake. Because the sea can harbor lost ships, forgotten relics, and ancient beasts. But sometimes what floats from the bottom does not come from the bottom at all. Sometimes it comes from the other side. Part 28. The Static Field Under the Gulf. In 2021, an ocean research team operating in the center of the Gulf of Mexico detected an anomaly at more than 4,800 m deep, an area about the size of a block where radio and sonar equipment stopped working for no apparent reason. Known as an acoustic dead zone, this area of the ocean floor not only blocked sound but seemed to absorb it. There were no echoes or returns. Even the sound of the ship's own engines disappeared when it was directly over the area, leaving only a deathly silence that the technicians described as a pressure in the ears, not around them, but inside them. Initially, it was dismissed as a natural magnetic anomaly, perhaps an unusual mineral deposit or a pocket of methane gas interfering with transmission. But when the team deployed a submersible drone equipped with passive recording devices and reinforced communication cables, the mystery deepened. When the drone entered the perimeter, the video transmission remained stable for less than 90 seconds. The lights flickered. The image froze. Then, without any sign of mechanical failure, the transmission resumed. What reappeared was not the typical seabed view. Instead, the video showed the interior of what appeared to be an artificial space. Flat stone surfaces marked with regular grooves arranged geometrically, not randomly. There was no sediment, fauna, or corals, only smooth structures disappearing into the darkness, glowing faintly with an intense blue bioluminescence that pulsed at exact intervals of 88 seconds. No fish swam through that space. No current was perceived. It looked like a chamber or something built to mimic one. The operators were paralyzed. The drone's position sensors continued to indicate the correct coordinates of the anomaly in the Gulf, but nothing in the video matched the expected terrain. A perfectly smooth floor, vaulted ceilings, openings that looked like corridors extending beyond the limits of the lens, as if the drone had slipped, not in position, but in context. And then the static began. It was not a distortion of the video. It was visual. The signal was covered by crawling interference. It was not white noise, but a pattern. Black on black. Shapes similar to runes engraved on the screen, which appeared and disappeared with an organic, repetitive, not random, rhythm. The patterns were later analyzed by linguistic and digital signal experts. One conclusion stood out above all others. The symbols were self-similar in all frames, like recursive fractals. They did not have a known syntax or linguistic structure, but responded to stimuli. When the drone's lights dimmed, the symbols lit up. When the drone emitted sonar, the pattern changed. It was not just a signal, it was a reaction. Right at minute 11, the drone's cable began to retract automatically, a pre-programmed safety system in case of prolonged contact loss. As the camera moved upwards during extraction, the last recorded image was simple, terrifying, and silent. A flat wall covered by an alveolar pattern of hexagonal openings, each approximately 1 meter wide, and inside each, the faint hint of something curved, motionless, simply waiting. The transmission was cut off. The drone returned completely intact, but its internal storage had been erased. All the chips were erased, as if a magnetic overload had occurred, although no external one had. Even more disturbing, the drone's outer shell was coated with a film unlike any cataloged in the Gulf. A translucent gelatinous layer intertwined with crystalline fibers. They shone dimly under ultraviolet light. Microscopic analysis revealed a lattice structure, identical to the patterns observed in the static field. It was as if the symbols had been printed directly onto the drone's molecular surface. What kind of intelligence resides down there? One that does not move, or chase, or hunt, but encodes itself in the matter it touches. Some now believe that the anomaly is not a place at all, but a door, though not in the sense of science fiction. It is a crack in perception, a fold in reality, where certain physical laws are not met, and where consciousness itself could be recorded, translated, or read. That what the drone entered was not just a space, but a function, a kind of equation that is slowly, eternally solved under the crushing weight of the Gulf. The silence in that area persists. Other ships have passed nearby and temporarily lost access to their sensors. Their compasses have briefly spun, and their hulls have vibrated in ways that no current can explain. Marine animals avoid it completely. Dolphins swim around it, describing wide arcs. Whales fall silent as they approach. Even the density of plankton drops to nearly zero within the perimeter. What is down there is not sleeping or hiding. It is active, but in a way that does not conform to movement or energy as we understand them. Its presence is a form of calculation, an expectant intelligence that does not manifest, but waits to be discovered, to be read, or, worse, to read in turn. Some researchers no longer refer to it as the anomaly, but as the observer, because it never moves, because it never blinks, because it already knows that we are observing it, and is deciding how to respond. Part 29. The lights that should not appear in the cold waters off the coast of Greenland, near the edge of the continental shelf, where the ocean floor drops abruptly into the abyss. Fishermen have told the same story for generations. They speak of lights, not of stars reflected in the waves, nor of ships or flares, but of lights that rise, pale and slow, that ascend from the depths, lights too deep that appear under the boats in perfect stillness, motionless at first, and then slowly rising towards the surface. Sometimes one, sometimes dozens, always silent, always too big. In 2015, a Norwegian fishing boat named Havsoka reported such an event in its navigation logs. It was a routine fishing expedition. Shortly after midnight, with the sea calm, there was no current or wind. Then, without warning, the ship's sonar detected a dense cluster of contacts rising from below, irregularly, but of enormous size, emerging from a depth of more than 4,000 m. The crew believed it was a pod of whales. But when the contacts came within 100 m of the surface, lights appeared. They were not reflections. They came from within the shapes. At first they were faint, like lanterns of distant ships seen through the fog. But then they became brighter, colder, of a bluish-white color, of the type that is associated with the bioluminescence of the marine depths. But it was not jellyfish or plankton. The sonar did not register any movement. The objects were not swimming. They rose in place, maintaining a perfect geometric separation, a network of lights that emerged vertically, pulsing once every 12 seconds in unison. Then they stopped exactly 28 m below the surface. The lights froze during the ascent. Not a ripple, not a flash, only stillness, as if they watched the ship above them. One of the sailors leaned over the side with a flashlight. He pointed it down. The moment the beam of light crossed the waterline, the lights flickered. They did not go out, but shone once, simultaneously, like a flash of recognition. Then, one after another, they sank again, slowly, like stars returning to the sky in reverse. The sonar stopped registering their presence after they passed the 2,000-meter mark. Then, nothing. The crew did not speak for hours. When they returned to port, they turned over the images. The official response from maritime authorities was a brief note. Anomalous bioluminescent phenomenon. No reason for alarm. But the images tell a different story. When analyzing them frame by frame, the lights showed impossible properties. They did not blur in the water. They did not show distortions by refraction. They were not affected by the ocean. They shone as if they were inside a vacuum, as if the sea had simply parted around them. And there is something else. The pulses, those rhythmic, slow flashes, were not random. Later, a researcher compared the intervals with recorded seismic data and discovered a terrifying coincidence. The pulse intervals coincided with known tectonic microdisplacements, the slight regular movements of the Earth plates under the seabed. The lights pulsed in synchrony with the planet. So the question is not only what those lights are. The question is, what are they listening to? One theory postulates that they are not creatures, but sensors, autonomous entities left by an unknown intelligence embedded in the depths as part of a surveillance system. They are not ours, not even necessarily from Earth. Their location in the tectonic limits and abyssal zones would make a lot of sense. Natural energy sources, limited interference, and strategic coverage of pressure differences throughout the planet. They could remain inactive for millennia, feeding on chemical gradients, waiting only for a trigger, a change in energy production, a ship over their head, a sonar ping, a flashlight. But the oldest theory, the one whispered among Arctic sailors, is darker. It says that the lights are not machines. They are eyes, not in a metaphorical sense, but literally vast bio-optical receptors that belong to something sleeping under the Earth's crust. They're not dead, nor dreaming, just watching, not toward us, but between them, maintaining their alignment, preserving their formation, watching the sea as if they were watching any movement that does not come from above. Because the theory says that it is not us whom they observe. They are waiting for something else, something old, something forgotten by the ocean, but not by them. And when that moves, when the sea changes as it has not done in eons, the lights will turn on again. Not to warn us, nor to welcome it, but to join it. So the next time you are at sea on a calm night and look down and see a light rising through the water that shouldn't shine, don't illuminate it with your own light, because it is not asking to be seen. It is seeing if you remember it. Part 30. The abyss breathes at the southern end of known sea routes. Beyond the chaotic weather patterns of the Southern Ocean stretches a strip of water so deserted and little traveled that some maps mark it as unmonitored. Sailors call it the Blue Hollow. Scientists rarely talk about it. On the surface, nothing is unusual, just a deep and infinite ocean and a calm that seems to silence even the wind. But below is a formation unlike any other on Earth. A well, not a pit, nor a canyon, but a circular void in the seabed, almost 20 kilometers wide, and so deep no expedition has reached its base. It is called the abyss that breathes and is perhaps the most terrifying secret of the ocean. The first recorded contact occurred in 1978 during a Soviet mission to map the deep sea. Its submersible drone Mirror 1 descended into the well guided by sonar. It reached 6,000 m. Then it began to ascend, not because it was called, but because something below pushed it back. A vertical current, smooth and unnatural, pushed the drone up despite all descent power. Its sensors overloaded. The signal cut off. The crew recovered the drone hours later. The hull was intact, but the titanium casing had stretched without dents or cracks, stretched as if the entire frame had been exposed to something that warped time or matter in a subtle but irreversible way. The internal instruments, once perfectly calibrated, no longer gave accurate readings. Even a most basic altimeter spun senselessly. However, what most alarmed the scientists was the last fragment of the sonar data. For just under 8 seconds, the drone had recorded a regular rhythmic pulse. It was not tectonic. It was not mechanical. It was organic, a sound that went up and down like a deep, slow inhalation. Then nothing. The Soviets classified the data and abandoned the project. But they had already christened the anomaly as daikhani, which means breath in Russian. Decades later, private exploration groups, armed with better technology and fewer restrictions, returned to the place. They launched probes equipped with the most advanced stabilization systems and reinforced pressure ports. Most failed, but in 2007, one succeeded. The images are difficult to see. The camera descends beyond 8,000 m. Darkness consumes everything. Then, at 9,400 m, the pressure readings stop increasing. Instead of continuing to rise as they should at those depths, they stabilize, then fall. The probe continues to descend, but the pressure is dropping. It defies the laws of physics. A kilometer further down, gravity seems to change. The readings become inconsistent. The orientation fails. The camera rotates, then stabilizes, and what it shows is impossible. The seabed does not open into a basin, but into a vast hollow chamber, surrounded by walls that curve like the inside of a lung. Smooth, stratified, organically textured, but made of black stone that does not reflect light. The pulse continues now stronger, as if the entire space were exhaling. A deep movement every 60 seconds. It is not air nor water, it is something in between. The currents do not ripple or swirl. They move undulatingly, guided by no external force. It is not the sea that moves here. It is the space itself and the eye. During a single frame, the camera captures it. An enormous circle embedded in the wall farthest from the camera. It is not a real eye. It has no iris or pupil, but its shape is undeniable. Concentric rings, rough texture, a faint glow like a film of glass over a liquid. It does not blink, but changes. It contracts slowly, as if responding to the probe's presence. Then, the pressure shoots up. The probe implodes. The images recovered from an auxiliary cable sparked a frenetic debate. Most scientists refuse to acknowledge it. Some call it an invention. Others say it demonstrates what some had feared. The abyss that breathes is not a passive geological feature. It is a living structure, not as a coral reef, but as a sleeping beast breathes. A few radical researchers propose that the abyss is not only alive but aware, and that it is not limited to reacting, but anticipates, responding not to sound or movement, but to conscious attention. That the mere act of observing it changes it. There are ancient legends, transmitted by isolated coastal communities near Patagonia, about the Yakana, the sleeping mouth of the sea. They say that it opens once every 1,000 years, not to consume, but to inhale, to drink the world above, to savor the surface and remember what was once forgotten. They say it is not evil. It is not cruel. It is simply ancient, older than Earth's continents, older than light. Since 2007, no crew has returned to the abyss that breathes. Satellites show no signs of seismic activity. No ship traces routes in the area. Even the birds seem to avoid flying over it. But once a year, On the same date and time as the last probe descended, the instruments placed nearby record a slight change in the water. The same rhythm, a pulse of breath. Whatever lies beneath the blue hollow has not moved, not emerged. It has not spoken, but still breathes, and remembers being seen. Part 31. The Whale That Sang to Nothing. In early 1992, hydrophones scattered throughout the North Pacific captured a strange signal. At first, it was thought to be a whale song. Long, deep calls that rose and fell through the water like solitary notes. But this song was different. Its frequency was higher than any known whale song, registering 52 hertz, outside the hearing range of all whale species recorded. It was constant, repetitive, and, most disturbing, unique. No response, no echo, no chorus, just a voice calling from the dark. Marine biologists christened it the 52 hertz whale. And as the years passed, it became a kind of scientific ghost story. Each migration season, the signal returned, moving south to north and then back, always alone. No other whale ever responded. No other species matched that pattern. It was as if the ocean had birthed a creature designed not to be heard. For a time, the most accepted theory was that it was a malformed blue whale. Others thought it could be a hybrid, a rare cross between a fin whale and a blue whale. A genetic accident that gave rise to a sound too strange to recognize. But despite advances in tracking, tagging, and satellite images, visual confirmation was never obtained. The ships that passed near the sound's origin did not detect anything unusual on sonar. It was there, then it disappeared. It moved with the changing season, as if following ancestral routes that only it knew. But something changed in 2004. That year, for the first time, the 52 hertz signal split. It was not a second whale. Not exactly, but an echo, a double tone. A main signal, followed by a second, slightly delayed, weaker, and with a slightly different tone. At first, it was believed that it was a reverberation, an underwater reflection on a seamount or on the wall of a trench. But the delay was not constant. It changed, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, as if what imitated the sound was responding, not reflecting. This gave rise to a new set of theories. Perhaps the 52 hertz whale had never been alone. Perhaps there had always been something else listening and learning. Then came the most profound anomaly. In 2011, a deep-sea probe deployed to record tectonic activity near the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench captured an unexpected acoustic profile. The 52 hertz signal, clear and distinct, came from below the trench bottom, not from the water, but from a sediment layer almost 100 m thick. The sound was not traveling through the ocean. It resonated through the rock. Even more disturbing was that its frequency was decreasing. Little by little, as time passed, the sound had shifted downwards, losing hertz over the years, deepening, darkening, as if what emitted the sound was aging or descending toward something colder, quieter, less like a scream and more like a hum. For scientists who believed it was biological, this was tragic. The idea of a single malformed animal calling in vain for decades was already heartbreaking. But for others, the change in frequency suggested something else. The sound was not fading. It was becoming something new. That same year, deep-sea hydrophones detected another anomaly. It was not a sound, but silence. An ever-widening null audio cone in which no marine sound could be heard. No whales, no clicks, no engine noise, just absence. The null zone grew during the following weeks, coinciding exactly with the migratory route of the 52 hertz signal, as if something huge and inaudible was sweeping the ocean and clearing it of sound in its path. One team proposed the unthinkable. The whale never existed. That the original signal had been an artifact, a kind of decoy, not a creature, but a mechanism that tested responses. That the mimicry, the echo, was the real source. That the 52 hertz tone had been bait. An emission waiting for some ears to listen. Studying the silence that followed, learning how marine life reacted or not for decades, until one day it began to imitate the whales that never responded. And now it moves without them. No faster, no louder, just more constant. Its call has become almost tectonic in tone, less a song and more a vibration. Deep and grave, it travels hundreds of kilometers without losing shape. Marine sensors now capture it along the Bering Sea, along the Aleutian Trench, through the broken ridges near the Challenger Deep. Each tone follows a rhythm, a slow repeated increase in frequency followed by a sharp drop, like an inverted breath. We still call it the 52 Hz whale out of habit, out of hope. But what if it was never a whale? What if it is listening? What if the ocean, in its unfathomable depths, has awakened something that previously slept under the threshold of sound? Something that needed time to learn what life sounds like, how it moves, how it sings. And now that it knows it, it sings back, but not to be heard. To see who listens and who sings in response. Part 32. The object that does not sink. In the southern end of the Indian Ocean, where maritime traffic is scarce and the depths extend beyond the reach of most submersibles, there is a sector that certain military satellites call Zone 0 Beta. For the public, it is nothing more than a piece of ordinary ocean, cold, deep, and far from everything. But under its waves, something floats, or rather, does not sink. It was first recorded in 1984 by an Australian defense satellite searching for Soviet submarines. A metallic signal of about 50 m in diameter was observed moving slowly through an area where no ship had been sighted. It left no wake. It did not emit heat. And when planes were sent to visually confirm the object, nothing was seen. No shape, no disturbances on the surface. But the satellite insisted that it was there. The object reappeared in 1991, then in 1998, and from 2010, more frequently. Always in a slightly different position, always under the surface at exactly 2 m, and always with the same signature. A dense core of high metallic concentration, surrounded by a halo of distorted electromagnetic interference, as if it were wrapped in a field that made its detection difficult. Not invisible, simply indescribable. When unmanned underwater vehicles were finally sent to intercept it, they encountered a phenomenon that still defies explanation. The object could not be seen with light. The sonar detected nothing. And yet, when the vehicles passed through the projected coordinates, they experienced resistance, not as when crashing against a wall, but as when going through thought. Their instruments slowed, not mechanically, but cognitively. The AI on board took longer to process orders. Memory access times increased. The images were delayed fractions of a second that accumulated until they became complete delays. It was as if something was affecting not the machines themselves, but their sense of time. After passing through the location, the anomalies ceased. In one mission, the drone dropped a weight tied by rope on the object, hoping it would pass through the water. The line stopped falling exactly 196 m below the surface, as if it had touched glass. But when they recovered it, the weight was dry. There was no water, no debris, just an absence, as if it had passed through a void within the sea. The most disturbing thing is what happened next. During the 6 hours following the experiment, the temperature of the water around the drone began to rise, not from below, but from the sides. And along with the heat came a sound, a deep subharmonic tone, inaudible to the human ear, but enough to shake the equipment housing. The same tone was repeated every 11 minutes, coinciding exactly with the rhythm of a long-dead pulsar on the opposite side of the galaxy. Researchers now believe that the object is not from this ocean, possibly not even from this world. One theory proposes that it is a temporary anchor, something designed not to move through space, but to exist through time, always at the same depth, always resisting both gravity and displacement. It does not float by buoyancy. It floats because it must, because its presence is fixed in very specific coordinates in the fourth dimension, and the ocean has simply risen and fallen around it for thousands, perhaps millions of years. There is evidence that it has been referred to previously. Polynesian oral traditions speak of a celestial stone that was not found in the skies, but under the sea, so immobile and eternal that it made the tide fear to move. It was said that sailors who sailed too close forgot how to count the stars, lost all sense of orientation, not by the compass, but by intuition, as if the nearby ocean whispered wrong things to their sense of balance. In 2017, a commercial plane passed directly over the area on a clear day. The pilot did not report anything unusual, but a passenger, an astronomer by profession, presented an unusual note upon landing. He described a sudden reverberation inside the plane's cabin, like a brief harmony that went through his chest and caused him a moment of vertigo and nausea. No other passenger noticed it, but at the exact moment he felt it. The satellites recorded a brief, perfectly spherical wave in the water, a dome-shaped displacement. It lasted less than a second, as if the object had breathed out. The predominant fear is not that the object rises, but that one day it may fall, that something has kept it fixed at that exact point for a reason, something ancient and deliberate. And if that bond weakens, if that lock breaks, what will be unleashed will not be a creature or a machine, but an event, a moment that unfolds outward from the center of the sea, going back in time and rewriting everything that came before. So the object floats 2 meters below the surface, never sinking, never rising, observing, or perhaps listening, or simply occupying a place in the sea that should never have been open. And every few years it beats again, as a reminder, not for us, but for the ocean itself, that something waits, just out of our reach, just below the surface, and that it will never leave. Part 33. The submarine that came back wrong. In 1973, at the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Navy launched a classified reconnaissance mission in the Sea of Okhotsk. The submarine Khmyt 129 Echo II was equipped not only with conventional weapons, but also with deep-water listening devices and experimental radar absorption panels along its hull. Officially, the operation never existed. Unofficially, it was part of a project called Camming Globina Depth Oven, an effort to investigate seismic anomalies detected along the Kuril-Kamchatka Trench. During the first 48 hours, the mission proceeded without incident. The submarine descended beyond what was permitted by standard protocol, well below the crush depth of most known vessels at the time, but the hull held. Communications with command were intermittent, but remained intact. Then, on the third day, the K-129 disappeared. There was no emergency beacon, no distress call, just silence. For 2 weeks, the Soviet fleet combed the region. They found nothing. No remains, no oil, no signs of implosion. It was as if the ocean had swallowed the submarine whole. And then, exactly 21 days after its disappearance, the K-29 emerged on its own, several hundred kilometers north of its original position. When the rescue teams went aboard, what they found defied explanation. The outer hull was intact. The navigation lights were on. The ship had power, but there was no crew. All the cabins and all the corridors were empty. There were no corpses, no blood, no damage, just absence. The meals were prepared and untouched on the tables. The clothes were still in the closets. An officer's cap was found on the radio console, as if it had just been placed there. It was as if the crew had gone out for a moment in the middle of their work and had never returned. And then came the records. The internal data system had been completely erased. However, a single backup tape was found hidden in an engineer's toolbox behind a false panel. It contained a single audio file, 43 seconds of distorted sonar noises. It was not voice, nor wails. It was something else, something that started as a deep, rhythmic pulse and rose to a high frequency before being interrupted. An audio specialist later pointed out that the pattern resembled a biometric wave, similar to a heartbeat, but too fast and regular. The Soviets towed the ship to a secure naval dock near Vladivostok. Scientists and engineers crowded the ship, but the longer they stayed on board, the stranger the reports became. The clocks stopped working in sync with the rest of the base. Electrical equipment failed randomly, especially those with magnetic components. Several workers began to complain of nausea, headaches, and, in exceptional cases, an overwhelming sensation of déjà vu. An officer, during a routine inspection, suffered a seizure after staying in the command center for only 2 minutes. He woke up repeating a phrase in perfect English, a language he did not speak. They were not the only ones. In the lower levels of the ship, temperature readings fluctuated wildly. In the torpedo room, an air pocket was kept 10 degrees Celsius colder than the rest of the ship, unaffected by the heating systems. The instruments placed there often did not start or recorded confusing data. A naval engineer placed a voice recorder in that space for 12 hours. The recovered audio was chilling. Metallic moans were heard, yes, in the tension of the hull, but also something softer, like a breath. The submarine was finally sealed and dismantled. Since then, its location has been removed from all known records. Some say it was buried in a pit. Others believe that it was dismantled and dispersed. But rumors persist that some of its parts, sections of the hull, the wiring, and even a single navigation computer were reused in other Soviet ships, and that strange things also began to happen to them. Navigation errors in calm waters, power outages during clear nights, and, always, that same repetitive peak in the sonar, like a distant signal trying to finish a sentence that should never have been heard. A Western intelligence agency, after intercepting fragments of internal Soviet communications, dubbed the event the Black Return. Not because of the color of the submarine, but because what returned was not the same as what had left. That something else had filled the space where the crew had been. It was not a creature, nor a force, but something more abstract, a memory that the sea had stored, a replica, a substitute for what the ocean had decided to preserve. To this day, the Russian Navy does not recognize the last voyage of the K-29, but its sonar signal continues to appear every few years near the Kuril pit. Always briefly, always alone, the ship calls home, but no one answers. Because perhaps what returned was not trying to return. Perhaps it was trying to replace. Part 34. The signal awaited silence in the remote South Atlantic, near the triple junction of Bouvet, a tectonic point where three main plates converge, one of the quietest stretches of ocean on the planet. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a measurable fact. The ambient acoustic levels in this region are lower than almost any other part of the world. You cannot hear the song of the whales, nor the crunching of the shrimp, nor the tectonic murmurs, only a vast silence. For years, it was dismissed as a coincidence, a place between migratory routes, between points of seismic tension, between currents, until in 2002 that silence was broken. A listening station operated by the International Marine Observation Network, the Vela Project, recorded a narrow-band signal unlike any previously recorded. It was not strong. In fact, it was so weak that it was almost dismissed as noise. But its clarity was unmistakable. A perfect harmonic interval of 4 notes evenly spaced in a 20-minute cycle. Every hour, like a lighthouse, not one that was asking for help, but one that had been waiting. The signal repeated for exactly 6 days. Then, without warning, it stopped. Dozens of hydrophones placed within a radius of 500 kilometers recorded the same thing. Total silence before, total silence after. Nothing unusual in temperature, salinity, or pressure. There were no signs of tremors or marine migrations. And yet, something had chosen that place and that moment to speak. When the data were further analyzed, a pattern emerged that disturbed even the most skeptical engineers. The tones were not arbitrary. They matched the harmonics of an ancient stringed instrument, specifically the siren, an Egyptian ritual instrument used to invoke protection against invisible forces. The frequencies did not match perfectly, of course, but the ratios were almost identical. When reproduced using a physical model, the tone resonated too clearly, as if it had been designed for something with structure, not for water, as if the signal was not being transmitted through the ocean, but through something that was below it. A team was sent to deploy a passive sonar near the central point of the emission. At first, all systems worked normally. The glider descended to 3,000 m and began its wide, circular pattern. Then it stopped. There was no error or failure. It simply stopped transmitting telemetry. The only signal that it sent was a basic depth pulse, like a heartbeat. And that heartbeat was not unique. 20 minutes after the glider anomaly, another signal was detected. This time it was not coming from the glider, but from beneath it. A second pulse delayed, less than half a second, mirroring the frequency and rise time of the glider's ping. As if something was responding, not with data or voice, only with its presence. The glider finally emerged, apparently unharmed, but its memory had been reset. All records, all diagnostics had disappeared. Only the outer hull gave a clue that something occurred. Along its lower section, microscopic pits, thousands of small slits in a spiral pattern that extended from the bow to the stern in a Fibonacci sequence. It was not random corrosion or damage caused by wildlife, but a geometry carved or grown into the metal with precision that no known biological or environmental process could explain. What emerged in the following years were rumors, not formal reports. Testimonies from nearby naval vessels experiencing fluctuations in crew cognitive concentration. Strange dreams, a barely perceptible low-frequency hum, navigation errors lasting only seconds but diverting course by kilometers. A sailor claimed to have seen lights underwater, which did not shine but attracted light, curving the ocean and darkening it. His ship was disabled. It was never reassigned to deep-sea tasks. The most accepted theory is simple and terrifying. Something under the ocean does not want to be heard. And it wasn't until the world got louder, until our oceans were filled with sonars, cables, drones, and noise, that it finally had to respond. Not as a threat or warning, but as a reminder that it is still there. That silence was not absence, but patience. That the world we explore, dissect, and measure is not empty, but occupied by intelligences that are not interested in contact, diplomacy, or curiosity, only in preservation. Of what? We still don't know. But every year, in that silent triangle of water, researchers notice a strange calm in the acoustic activity. The instruments desynchronize. Drones slow down for no apparent reason. And if you stand on the deck of a silent ship on a windless night, you may feel that you are not here, but that the pulse returns. For notes, a deep breath, and the ocean remembers how to speak again. Part 35. The creature that swam in circles for centuries. In 2006, a team analyzing movement patterns in the South Pacific using long-term satellite buoys observed something strange. A huge object, larger than any known marine life form, was spinning in an elliptical path at a depth of more than 3,000 meters. The trajectory was slow, taking over 12 days to complete a full orbit. And yet, it was constant. In fact, data revealed that the movement was not new. This elliptical pattern had been repeated without interruption for decades. When they expanded their study using declassified naval acoustic data from the Cold War, they found references to a similar anomaly dating to 1971. And the more they investigated, the further back it went. That thing had been moving along the same precise path since the 1940s, perhaps even earlier, and had never stopped. The object, unofficially called Entity 6261, defied all biological models known to science. Its acoustic signature was soft but dense, like a slow reverberation through muscles and cartilage. No bones, no hollow lung cavities, just mass. And yet, it was not drifting like a dead whale. It moved with determination, steadily and constantly. It was not a lost creature, but one committed to following the same path repeatedly. A living metronome in the darkness. Attempts to visually locate the entity failed. The submersible's lost orientation near the planned coordinates. The drones lost signal. The few that returned showed strange distortions in their cameras, like low-resolution static wrapped in a sphere of perfect darkness. There was no thermal trace, no visible form, just a shadow surrounded by an absence of life. Even the microorganisms, which normally abound in the depths, had disappeared. The water samples returned almost sterile, as if the region had been cleansed of any biological presence. This dead zone followed the entity in a ring, as if its existence altered the foundations of life. The plankton died, the fish moved away, the predators never went in. Whatever it was, the ocean knew to avoid it. A theory, proposed by a marginal but growing group of marine researchers, suggests that Entity 6261 is not a creature in the traditional sense. It is a kind of biological satellite programmed to move in this precise trajectory for reasons that go beyond survival or instinct. Some call it a sentinel, others a jailer, perhaps a guardian of something under the ocean floor. And this theory gains support if the pattern of its orbit is considered. The ellipse passes directly over a section of the seabed known as the hollow plate, an unusually thin region of the Earth's crust. It is unstable, plagued by fractures and conduits, some natural, others harder to explain. In 1993, a deep well near this region collapsed even though no activity was recorded. The divers, military, not civilians, were withdrawn from the mission and the event was buried under a geological reclassification. But those who studied the trajectory of Entity 6261 have observed something else. Every 19 orbits, about once every 240 days, the creature stops for minutes. Always at the same point, always in the center of the hollow plate. Then it continues as if checking a lock, ensuring it remains closed. Why would a creature of such magnitude move with such precision and repetition unless it has a task to fulfill? Perhaps it is not migration. Perhaps it is patrol. And then the signal arrived. In 2014, during one of the entity's passes, deep acoustic monitors picked up a low-frequency thud coming directly from beneath the hollow plate. Not from the creature, but from under it. The noise was not continuous, but shuddered as if something huge moved in its sleep. 4 minutes later, an echo occurred, reverberating through the rock under the ocean. When it reached the surface, it collapsed instruments along a research line, as if the vibration did not move through space, but through perception. Entity 6261 did not react. It continued its orbit. Some researchers believe that was the moment when the creature attached to that trajectory. It maintains it, reinforcing a limit that, if not controlled, could weaken. What lies beneath the hollow plate is not tectonic activity or volcanic pressure, but something sealed, something vast, something that does not move and waits. There are rumors among the few who know about this anomaly. Silent debates in closed conference rooms, censored memos passed between departments, all ending with the same phrase in different languages. Let go around, never intervene. Because there is a fear, not that the creature stops, but that it fails. That one day it returns to the center of the ellipse, stops as it always has, and never moves again. And that whatever is under the hollow plate feels the change and awakens. So Entity 6261 continues to swim in circles, deep and alone. The silent sentinel of a door that we can never open because never